Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it might be, wherever you are. How are you doing this morning, Christos?
I am tired, but good. I'm on
Yeah?
holiday. I'm still tired. It's not crazy, but I had a good gym session yesterday, and that means that my body is feeling it today,
Well, I
punishing
guess
me
that's good.
for what I did. How's your gym going?
Good. I was there this
Yeah,
morning, and I was there yesterday. And
good.
nobody's there on Tuesdays, which is nice. Well, they've got like so many of the things blocked off, obviously, because of COVID. So they've got like
Yes.
30 ellipticals, but like 6 of them are available.
Well,
So I
because they
tried to
spaced them
go.
out and you can't use these, they put labels on them or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ah,
So I was kind of like they're just not available. And I don't know what the deal was with this guy yesterday, but I mean, he was on that elliptical for like an hour. I was like, "Come on, dude, quit bogarting it. Like, just go take a walk." You know.
I
But
don't think
you
I can
know,
do 1 hour on the elliptical, man. That would kill me.
yeah. So anyway, and it's the sun finally came out. It's been raining and cold here for about 4 days, so the sun's finally out today, which is nice. Luckily, we are not in the Arctic temperatures that have plunged all the way down to Texas.
2 million homes without power this morning in
Yeah, it's
Texas.
crazy.
That's insane.
My in-laws got like 10 inches of snow up in Michigan. So the kids are like, "Well, let's go to Michigan. We want to go play in the snow." I'm like, "Yeah, we kind of needed
Now
to be there
let's drive
before."
over there. Yeah.
I was on his way to school this morning, taking my son to school this morning. He says, "Well," he's like, "Can we go to Texas?" I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Well, they got snow, and I want to go play in the snow." I'm like, "Well," I said, "Kiddo, you kind of got to be there first beforehand." So okay,
Yes.
you don't have any news because you're off this week anyway, right? So you don't have any news.
Yes, technically I'm off, but I'm here
Okay.
because I love you guys.
So this morning, I got some pings from people about some changes that LastPass is making to their free product. Okay, and it took me about 7 reads before I finally figured it out. But so far as I can tell, essentially, you get to choose one type of device, either a mobile device or a computer, right? And that's the only device type you can use. You can use as many of them as you want, but only one or the other. So you can't like have
Who
a
thought of that?
computer. I'll tell you who thought of it. Don't open this door because I'm going to walk through it. I'll tell you who thought of it. The same people who thought that it was a good idea to buy .NET Reflector at Redgate and tell everybody they were going to have a free version, and then tell everybody, nope, JK, and then write this like completely self-serving blog post about how, oh, well, we thought people would buy our other stuff, but they didn't, and so we're going to have to charge money for it. Bearing in mind, of course, it was the guy who wrote this was the co-CEO. So we can't give away a free tool that was already free that we bought, but we can have multiple CEOs. Like, just the whole thing it just killed me. Anyway, I don't know. I guess they need to make money because the only way you can get around this now, as of March 16th, the only way you can do this with LastPass now is to buy. So you got to pay for it, premium
Well,
or families.
in that case, I would say move on to a different product. I have been using Bitwarden for the last year after moving off 1Password, and I couldn't be happier. It's available everywhere. It's free. It's very stable. I love it, and it came highly recommended. So if you're looking for an alternative to LastPass, then check out Bitwarden.
Yeah, so we've used LastPass for families for a really long time, and we switched to use 1Password. So I'm trying 1Password
Oh.
out to see
Password.
if it's
Never
any
heard
better.
of I've been using Excel since BSD guy. Well,
That's one way to do it too. Don't let us, no judgment, right?
no judgment. Does it come
But
with a browser extension?
what, Excel? Some of the newer Excel add-ins are pretty persistent. There's one. So you remember Microsoft Money from 20, 30
Yes,
years ago, right?
I do. It came
So
around.
they made something called Money for Excel. It was like a plug-in for Excel or an add-in for Excel. I don't know what the proper term for it is anymore. So the money add-in lets you connect to bank accounts and stuff, and it pulls down all your transactions and whatever, and builds you a bunch of graphs, all that stuff. Which you look at it, and you're like, oh, it's pretty cool, and it's in Excel, so it's sitting here, it's on my machine, whatever. Actually, seems to be an entire back-end service behind it, because I haven't opened it in about a month, and I get emails once a week saying, money in Excel, here's what you've spent money on this last week.
Yes.
So clearly it's an ongoing, it's more of an ongoing service rather than just an Excel, add-in. But
They definitely relaunched it maybe 3 months ago, and there was an internal kind of a trial, which was great. But
yeah. So anyway, so pretty light on news. We were off yesterday, so
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I was pretty blown away when I read this. I mean, we've used Family, so I guess it wouldn't have hit us, but
shocked.
still.
In what world would you only be choosing one device to work on? Like I have 300 odd passwords somewhere. If I had to copy them from my phone to my laptop every time I need to use them, that's insane. Do I mail them to myself? That's crazy.
Well, there actually is there's another password vault that you could try.
Okay.
The Authenticator app.
Oh yes, I totally forgot about that. It now supports passwords. Yes.
Yeah. So there's in the Authenticator app. You can get the same, like in iOS and Android. It's like an autofill provider, and it's built into Edge. So if you have Edge Chrome, whatever, it just sort of just works, right? And if you've got if you use Chrome, there's an extension. And then they've got docs on how to import everything else. Like I've been importing everything between lots of different things just because I never know like what's going to be on a device when I need something. So it's like export from LastPass, import into Edge, import to Chrome, import to Firefox, then export somewhere else. And so I don't know. It's a mess. Lord only knows. If somebody got a hold of my machine, there's probably CSVs full of passwords on here somewhere that I've forgotten to delete. It's just a total mess. But this might be worth trying too. And for us, like we use Work Profile, Android Work Profile at work, and which is absolutely awful. And I would highly suggest you not use it. But we are stuck with it, and it's awful. Like, you have to turn on a device-wide VPN for your Defender stuff, or whatever, like Sonos. What's it called? Sophos? I don't know what it's called. One of those device security things. Like I can't copy and paste between a Word document and a text message or vice versa, but I don't know. I don't like it. But it is an approved. It's like an allow listed app, so it's approved for use in Work Profile. And so if you want to have passwords in Work Profile and your company's locking it down, then because I can't get LastPass in Work Profile, so it's kind of cool. Yeah, kind of cool in that regard. So I don't know. Give it a shot. I haven't really tried it and put it through its paces, but I think it'd be pretty cool to try. So it's worth a shot anyway. So yeah, if you've got the Authenticator app, you've already got it. It's already built in. So yeah.
Yeah. True.
All right. So
kept up to date.
We have Thomas coming at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific.
That's right.
But in the interim. We've got some flows and grants to talk about today, yeah?
We do indeed. Continuing our Identity Crisis learning modules.
Yeah. So if you haven't been with us for the past, 6-7 weeks we've been doing this. Tuesday mornings we spend an hour and we sort of talk about identity more at kind of an educational level, rather than the practical level that we do during the show where we're implementing it into something or whatever. And so we've talked about building applications and what identity systems are and what user databases are and all that sort of thing. And now we're getting closer to sort of the practical implementation of that, of like, okay, cool, we've got these flows and these grants that we use, and the flows and the grants are the things that you as the developer use to interact with these identity systems, right? So if you don't, thanks P2A 2020 for resubscribing for 4 months.
Yes.
We still have to. We've got to get all of our charity stuff squared away so we can get all that subscription money to the right hands. But
AZ Wildfire will help us with that, finding the right stem
Yeah.
organization.
He's like
Usual file.
he's a true Renaissance man. He does it all. So anyway, so today we're going to talk about flows and grants. We're going to take a look at a few of them. Kind of the most common ones that we sort of see regularly, right? Things that you as a developer are probably going to encounter, why you would use them in certain cases, and sort of what they look like. So we'll start. So you'll hear flows and grants thrown around a lot. It's kind of in everything identity related, right? It requires, weapons grade level of pedantry to keep up with it all. And
Yes.
so in OAuth 2 we've talked about a little bit in the past. OAuth 2 is purely an authorization system. So it's purely a way to say, me user, I want to give app ABC access to read my calendar. And only read my calendar. It shouldn't have access to anything else in my account because maybe I've got a bunch of stuff in my account. And so OAuth 2 was purely for authorization. Well, that worked fine, except for that people were now trying to use it for authentication too. So you'd sign in with Google or you'd sign in with Facebook, which was really OAuth, in order to give an app access to your accounts in other places. But instead, developers would take that data and also sign you in with it, which, there was no alternative. So what were you going to do? Ask them for a username and password and then do it, right? There really wasn't a great way to do it. So we ended up with OpenID Connect, and OpenID Connect was sort of a bolt-on, an extension to OAuth 2. So with OpenID Connect, you could now get both access to a user's stuff, but you could also learn who the user was and different properties about them, their name, all that sort of stuff. Well, so OAuth 2 flows or grants are called grants. So when you interact when you go through an OAuth 2 exchange with an authorization server, with a service provider like a Facebook or Microsoft or whoever, that's called a grant. For OpenID, when you're also doing OpenID work to both, because you may get both, right? You'll end up with both signing a user in and also getting access to, say, their Google Calendar or something. That's called a flow. I don't know why they named them differently, but they are. So you have things like authorization code, which is both a grant on the OAuth side and a flow on the OpenID side. And we wonder why developers don't want to spend a bunch of time learning identity. And we call the same things. Technically it's different because, So anyway, the big thing to keep in mind is we have this sort of concept of a user account. So this is a user, a person who's signing into a system, a person who owns something in a system, like my calendar data. And then we also have service accounts. These are accounts that are unmanaged, they don't have a user. So I'm not accessing a service account's calendar. I may need to access everybody's calendar because I don't know who the user is. There could be 20 users in my org. There could be 20,000 in my org. A service account doesn't have a user context, and so by virtue, a service account is essentially an administrative level of access, right? And if you look at service accounts and the kind of access they have, generally speaking, they are very privileged, right? So I might be able to say, yeah, this app can read my calendar, me, John's calendar, but you as an admin would be able to say, well, you can read everybody's calendar because a service account doesn't know. Service account is all or nothing. But on the user account side, we have lots of different ways to authenticate users and get their tokens. So we talked a little about authorization code last week. We're going to revisit that again here today. We've got device codes, refresh tokens, and these two down here in red. We have implicit and we have resource owner password credential. Now, implicit is large.
Ones, right?
Yeah, that's why they're in red. So implicit is sort of how we did things until really just kind of a few months ago, maybe a year ago. And implicit was all about for single page apps, for client apps, stuff that's sitting on in a browser, a single page app, a React app, an Angular app, whatever. That's what implicit was used for, and implicit is probably the least secure of all of the different flows and grants that are out there. Most of it happens in the browser. It's very difficult to verify an application, so you don't really know what app is using this, right? I mean, you can guess, but there's no way for that app in the browser to securely store a secret. And so because of that, there's no way for the app to authenticate itself and say, yeah, I am app 123 and this is user ABC. So really all we had to go by was, well, this is user ABC, and I'm only going to let you send a token back to a specific URL. But that itself and alone is less about security and any sort of verifiable thing and more about the fact that you registered the correct DNS record, right? Orphan DNS records were a real problem with this, and especially test ones. So like if you had a bunch of test localhost stuff, or if you had some testing domain that wasn't registered on the public internet or something, it was only local or something like that, you start to run into some real risks of people being able to get tokens as your app, even though they're not actually your app. So implicit, we've largely moved away from in favor of PKCE, authorization code with PKCE, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. And then there's resource owner password credential. Resource owner password credential is pretty much just that. You're going to take the username and password of the user, the resource owner, right? So you want to access my calendar, I'm going to give you my username and password.
Yep.
It's a bad idea. Because even though I might say, well, you only have access to my calendar, you have my credentials and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And in the days of now where my Amazon account is linked to AWS and Washington Post and 48 other places, and your Microsoft account is linked to your MSDN subscription and some Azure subscriptions and your Xbox and all these other things, you really don't want to give your passwords out really for any reason, right? And in a lot of these services, password credentials don't even work anymore. So like in the case of Microsoft, if you have MFA turned on your account, resource owner password essentially just doesn't work anymore because there's no way to do MFA.
Which is good.
Because you're essentially making an API call with the username and password in the URL, and that's not good.
Yeah.
There is one case which somebody came to talk to us about actually a few weeks ago, which is for UI testing.
Mm-hmm.
So UI testing is so far about the only legitimate reason we've seen to use resource owner password credential. We see other people using it in the case of, say, mobile apps. So there was a person that I used to work with, and they ran the mobile practice place I used to work. Built a lot of mobile apps. And this was sort of a perennial discussion we would always get in, which is, well, I don't want to open a browser, right? Like, I don't want people to open a browser to sign in. Mm-hmm. And if it's, say, like, if you're building, Twitter V2, well, okay, like, you own the identity, and thus username and password is okay, right? But if you're signing in with another account, you don't want to get users in any sort of, you don't want to reinforce anything to a user that says, oh, I should totally just type in my username and password into this random application that I downloaded from the internet, right?
Yep.
So RPC has very, very limited use cases in 2020 and 2021. On the flip side, however, we have service accounts. And service accounts, really, there's no user, and there's nothing interactive about it. You'll notice that most of these over here that are listed, these all have some level of interactivity, with the exception of resource owner, where a user is doing something, a user is granting access, a user is giving you access to go and do a thing or whatever. And because of that interactivity, we can do things like MFA. We can enforce policy. We can change things about users before we send them over. We can verify things about the application that's calling. In service accounts, however, there's no user, and thus who's going to be interactive in the case of service accounts? And of course, that answer is nobody. And that's when we get into client credentials. And the client credential grant is just that. You use a set of credentials generated for a client application, so your back-end scheduled task, right, that's running on a server somewhere, your cron job, or a console app that's running as a service somewhere. They use their own credentials to authenticate purely as themselves and can access resources, all calendars in the org, all mailboxes in the org, whatever. So those are used by different kinds of apps. So we've got these two types of clients. We've got confidential clients, and confidential client is essentially something that can keep a secret. This is your web server. It's essentially your web server. I really can't think of any other cases where you'd have a confidential client. But Essentially, it's something where you can control access to the things that are going to be executing identity flows, right? Mm-hmm. So web browser, I can send down to their browser, hey, go and do these things. But ultimately, my server itself is the thing that's going to handle talking to the identity system to exchange codes or do different bits of work. And so because of that, those clients can keep a secret. And by being able to keep a secret, they're called confidential clients. If you're
we have a question from GA Crow. What are the best practices for keeping client credentials secure?
We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So yeah, we're going to talk about it in just a minute.
GA Crow.
In public clients, however, your cell phone, your desktop apps, things that run in a browser, you don't control the client really, in the sense that the client's executing on somebody else's hardware. And if it's executing on somebody else's hardware, there's no way it can keep a secret, and especially not a shared secret. So because of that, public clients don't have any way to keep a secret, and public clients, we have to treat them a little bit differently. That's where we get into things like public proof key code exchange and things like that. Which is a way for these apps to verify they are maybe the originator of the request, but not necessarily the app themselves. Because we can't have, if you put a secret into your JavaScript app, all we've got to do is open up the Web Tools console, and we'll be able to look at your code and find your stuff. Same with mobile apps, same with desktop apps. So the first one we're going to look at, Christos is going to talk to us about the device code flow. And device code is an interesting one. Yeah, it's kind of neat because device code is all about services that devices that you don't really sit in front of. I mean, you may sit in front of them, but you sit in front of them from 10 feet away, right?
Yeah, and there's no way to really interact with them. I mean, there is. I mean, if you think about your TV, they come with a virtual keyboard and you can start typing things. But imagine if you had to type a 64-digit password to sign into your device or whatever. So it becomes very impractical, and that's where device code flow comes in, where it allows you to perform the authentication on a separate device than the device that actually needs the resources access. So the very best example here, because most of the people can relate to this, is your smart TV, where you want to sign into Hulu or Netflix or what have you. Rather than you having to sign in on the TV, you are presented with an authorization code that you use to go and sign in somewhere else on a separate device that you have better access to. And that makes your life a lot easier, especially considering that most modern devices, phones and laptops come with keyboards and browsers. Next slide.
Yeah, I've tried to sign in. I've tried to sign into my Netflix account on my TV. It's not. Even like the Roku virtual keyboard, like I try to paste a password in from LastPass or whatever, it just doesn't work. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's tricky. So this flow is fun over here because the client, which is your TV, right? It will actually go to a specific endpoint in order to get a user code. So you'll see the second line coming back to the client brings the user code. And the verification URI, that's the URI that you need to go to apply the user code. So the user takes the user code and the verification URI, and they go to their browser most of the time, and they apply the user code. At that point, they get redirected to the login server where they do the authentication. So you sign into your actual Netflix account there, for example. Then you take that back. At that point, or while this is happening, the actual client, your TV, is on a loop, listening and waiting for a response to come back. And once the authorization comes back, the client will use the client ID and device code, which is the second line from the bottom, to go back to the token endpoint to actually acquire the access token, refresh tokens, and ID tokens to sign you in. So it's very interesting that the actual resource of the client is doing this kind of a loop, waiting for you to do all the work somewhere else, and then it comes back. And as I was reading the RFC yesterday, I came across some security considerations when you're implementing this flow. So some of the things that you need to look after, for example, user code brute forcing. You've noticed that if you have used this kind of flow, the code that you get, the user code that you get, is usually 7 characters long. That means that it comes with a much smaller entropy, and that means that it could be brute forced. and somebody could be able to hijack the session. However, if the server employs proper rate limits and as a security implementer or whoever implements the authorization chooses the right length, then it should become really hard to brute force the password. Device code brute forcing, this is actually not visible to the user. So when you try to go through this flow, you don't have access to this one. That means that because it's something which is part of the software running this authorization flow, it can be very long, and therefore it can be protected from brute force. If you choose to have a smaller device code, then that could be liable to attack. Device trustworthiness. This is a little bit weird because, the scenario here is way far out, but in effect it allows for a man-in-the-middle attack, but either the manufacturer, so the TV manufacturer, or the authorization server have either been compromised or they're malicious. So imagine, Samsung releasing a TV and they want to harvest your credentials. And
well, hang on.
What?
Well, is it far-fetched? Imagine I bought a piece of network hardware, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know what kind. Say, a breezy, sunny network appliance, right? And its intention is to do, network monitoring and logging. And let's say that somebody managed to get a hold of the signing certificate for me, right? So, is it that far-fetched?
Probably not. I was thinking more far-fetched for the authorization server to be compromised.
Oh, well, sure. But the device itself, it's still, at the end of the day, it's still public client. It's still one of those things where a person could... somebody could put malicious software on their device, or like in the case of SolarWinds, supply chain gets blown up, right?
Yeah.
So I can see that. I don't know. Not to mention, have you seen? You see all the weird stuff that we see in security news and stuff about, here's a malicious app that was downloaded 10 million times on some store, on Play Store or whatever. And it took 10 million installs before somebody finally realized it. Or somebody handed off and took an open source project and sold it to somebody else, and the new maintainers are completely malicious or whatever. So, I don't know. I'm just like, if your TV is starting to melt because it's running like a crypto miner in the back end, I guess now you know why.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and it's crazy how many devices are connected to the internet these days. Like your toothbrush, does it really need to be connected to... to the internet and authenticate against a backend, and you have an account? It's just weird. But you're right. It was not 2 or 3 years ago when they used IoT devices to launch the largest DDoS attack ever. So it was like digital cameras and toothbrushes that were being hijacked to run malicious hardware. So it might not be far-fetched after all. You're absolutely right. Now you got me worried. Like, who checks the Samsung TVs that are okay? Like, oh my God, I'm becoming paranoid. I'm becoming a hermit. I'm giving up on everything.
I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I've gotten way more paranoid in the past 10 years about, I don't know, devices in general. So, anyway, sorry, continue.
Yes. No, man, it's fine. Thanks for the commentary. Remote phishing. Where you receive an email saying go and sign into your TV, and at this point there are instructions on the emails, so you are redirected to visit the verification URL and enter your code. That means that, however, for that to happen, the device needs to be on the attacker's possession, which is super weird. Like, why would I get you to sign into my device? Well, one way maybe is to actually use your account to buy services and movies and whatever, if that's the case. But again, it seems to be the reverse of what you would do in a phishing scenario.
Yeah, some people do remote phishing of it's actually all the phishing participants know, because it's your college age kid calling his dad and saying, "Dad, I need you to sign into Netflix. What's the code that's on your TV?"
Yeah. My wife has a Greek account where she needs access, and every so often they reset the password, so she has to call her brother, who has the Greek phone in his possession, to get the code. That's super weird. Then we have session spying. Now imagine you are sitting in your living room trying to set up your Netflix on your TV, and somebody with binoculars across the street is trying to actually see the code that your TV is emitting, and they manage to sign in before you sign in using the code. And that is apparently something that can happen. And
Yeah,
to
I mean,
mitigate
yeah.
against that, yeah.
Doing it, you're sitting at work, somebody's shoulder surfing, or you're trying to sign into the big TV, you know. Although, I don't really know.
What?
Yeah, I don't know why you would do that. Like, because if I'm going to use the device code, then now I guess it depends on, do you sign in first or do you show the device code first? That's probably the big difference, right? Is
Yes.
you know, if you signed in and all you got to do is consume the device code, then but even then, now you're linking your TV to somebody else's. I don't know. Whatever.
Exactly.
It's a weird.
Some of
weird
these
one.
security considerations are not always things that make sense. Like, because in one of the scenario, somebody gives you free Netflix. Rude. Paul Tayo is saying someone is giving you free Netflix. That's so rude. I know. Using somebody else. I mean, if somebody else is watching stuff that are totally not relatable to me, that could be an annoyance, right?
Yeah.
Just to spite me.
Well, they could totally screw up your recommendations, right? I mean,
exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, imagine having all these, rom-coms.
we left our I know we left our Netflix signed in. I think at my in-laws, and like every time we open it, it's like a million westerns, and talkies.
Yeah, or kids recommendations on your main page, right? Because they hijack your.
PSD guy says so much honey boo boo. I know. See, that's exactly what happens. You turn it on. You turn on your. Although I was browsing through Discovery Plus the other day, and it's like, I don't know. Like some of the stuff in there's neat, obviously, like the old school, like MythBusters and Deadliest Catch and all that sort of stuff. But man, some of these new shows, I'm like, this just seems like an extremely specific sort of stretch, my 1,200-pound life. It's like, what? Why would anybody want to watch that? I don't know. Maybe, it's just a me thing. I don't know. I just wouldn't want to watch that.
No. Talking about shows, there's a fantastic show coming back for season 2 for all mankind. If you haven't watched this one, it's on Apple TV though. So apologies for getting everybody excited and then talking about Apple TV, but imagine a world where the Russians landed on the moon first, and then the Americans had to play chase, and then it escalates to this kind of crazy scenario where they occupy the moon and try to define the territory. It's brilliant. So if you haven't watched it, highly recommend it. It's coming back on the 19th. So excited. Back to the code. Non-confidential clients. Absolutely true. If you are signing in on TVs and other devices, they are definitely public clients. So they should be treated like that, and there should be no client credentials whatsoever in there. And finally, non-visual code transmission. Again, trying to make it, oh my God, I'm being pixelated and disappearing from the screen. What's happening?
I know your voice kind of went out
I've been
too.
disappeared. I've been sent to the moon.
Well, it's snowing out where you are, right? It looks like you're captured
snowing.
underneath a
It's not
giant
snowing.
snowdrift right now.
I am back. He's been
Oh, you're being
censored by
cen-
big tech, by the big TVs. LG and Samsung are hijacking our.
See, they're onto you. We're exposing somebody's.
This is LG. Damn it! They heard it.
Somebody's.
I'm
Yeah, somebody.
so
We
much
just
trouble.
exposed somebody. I know.
Yeah, we did. Beat me up. Yes.
So, all right.
What is this? Anyway, let me continue with my the final one. Non-visual code transmission. So if your neighbor is peeping with his binoculars into your TV, then there's a way to mitigate that attack by by actually transmitting the device code either through text-to-speech or through Bluetooth. So rather than displaying it on the big TV and everybody having access to that, you could use something like voice or whatever to pass the code to the user. There you go.
I remember.
And then,
I remember in the early days, like when Disney Plus, like when the first apps came out. I remember you had the option then when you turned on when you started up the TV app, you had the option to open the app on your phone, and it would essentially sign you in that way, which I assume is sort of the non-visual code, right? I think YouTube or YouTube TV kind of lets you do that too. So
it does it, which is annoying because I have an Android phone as well, and sometimes when I need to sign into Google-related stuff, my phone will just say, "Are you approving this?" And it will do it, which is a great user experience. However, it means I need to have my phone with me at all times for that to work.
Well, I know we use the Google TV Chromecast thing, like the little white oblong thing, and those things, when you sign in with your Google account, they pick up all the Google Smart Lock passwords that you've synced in. So it's actually really nice because like you open up an app and it just signs you in. It's just done. I was like, oh man, this is nice. I get used to this. I mean, I hate the fact that we got Google stuff all over each TV, but it's super convenient. I guess that's the price you pay. The trade-off between privacy and other. Okay, sorry. Anyway, continue.
No. We have some interesting comments. Like one of them is on the Microsoft Developer channel where Rocklane is asking, how did you make SSO in mobile devices public clients? For example, the login on the mobile app uses Azure AD app, and I have some web apps with the same login. And I have given permission to sign in directly in the permissions on the Azure Active Directory. So SSO on public clients.
So that's mostly the web view part. So if you use System Browser to sign in, then you'll get SSO. Because the System Browser has the context of the other apps that you've accessed and has the context of being signed in already to Azure AD. So instead of embedding a web view, use the System Browser to sign a user in. If part of the app is a web view, I don't know. There may be some techniques depending on the web view, because I think in Android there are three different things. There's System Browser, there's like a web view, and then there's a third control, which I'm not entirely sure what that control is. Some of those, there's a certain control that is completely isolated to your app. So the cookie containers and everything are stored within your app, meaning once you sign in once, subsequent sign-ins in that app are going to stay there, right? They're going to be persistent. But there was another one I thought that sort of spanned the two, where it was it had the option to be totally throwaway, but it also had an option to use the cookie container of the System Browser. But I don't know. We'll have to look into it and see if the best way to do it is. But using System Browser is one of the most sort of guaranteed ways to get SSO from a device. There's also Broker Auth, where you use the Authenticator app. We'll find a link for getting Broker Auth set up. So like in an org scenario where I'm already signed into the device and it's a managed device and I've got Authenticator on there, your mobile apps can use Authenticator as opposed to using the browser to sign a user in. So then the MFA and everything happens for them right there because they're already in the Authenticator app. So yeah.
Nice. Bolt is saying, my favorite is when I attempt to project my laptop to the incorrect TV, and it's my neighbor.
Just get a projector and project it on the side of their house.
Exactly. Make it public. Right. Client credential flow. This is a fun one, and this is probably the only one where we covered before about service accounts, right? So this is the case where you have a daemon app or some service that needs to run in the background without any user interaction. This is not a user signing in. This is the app actually signing into itself. And then, as JP mentioned earlier on, usually with an elevated set of permissions because they need to view all calendars and have access to all calendars in order to execute some kind of functionality. It's important here that when you use this flow, things are locked down. So, in Azure AD, you need to, for example, you could lock it down in terms of how and what resources you can access. It's pre-agreed, so they don't go and roam freely on whatever it is. And the flow is pretty straightforward. You actually provide a client ID and a client secret, i.e. a username and a password. You send it to the token endpoint. You get the token back. for a specific resource, and then you use that to call an API or whatever resources you have in the backend. The API or the backend, your other service, needs to validate the token and then return the data back to. It's not a web server app. It's any app that uses that. And technically, a web server app would not be using client credentials. So we need to probably update that flow. That doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's the flow. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Again, it needs to be a confidential client. You can't really use a public client because, putting a username and a password somewhere that can be reverse engineered does not make any sense. So please be careful when you use this one.
Yeah, client credentials. We actually had some questions this morning about client credentials, and GA Crow is asking, how do we keep them secret? How do we store them? How do we secure them? Whatever. We're going to get that in here in just a minute.
Yep.
The big thing, the big flow now is authorization code. So authorization code is sort of, it's the one, right? This is the one that everybody asks about, and the one that we want to drive everything to, because with the addition of the Pixie extension that happened in OAuth 2.1, it is, I guess Pixie's been around before 2.1, but I think the fact that it's going to, I believe, be required in 2.1 means this is sort of the de facto standard, pretty much for everybody, and it solves a really specific problem, but we'll talk about that when we get closer to the flow, right? And Bolt's got an issue with LDAP, Radius, and Wi-Fi with B2C. You were not the first person to ask about that. And yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it later, because I don't remember how we solved it earlier, but I think there might be a very roundabout solution. So anyway, so let's look at
make sure to join the Discord.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, join the Discord for sure.
At the very top, you can see all the links. We haven't talked about support, JP, so we'll do a very quick break to talk about support and help.
Sure. We can talk about support. So we've got a team. You'll notice at the top of the screen, right under Get Help, you use that link. That will take you to Microsoft Q&A. And Microsoft Q&A is sort of like a Stack Overflow-esque type of a thing, although less toxic, I guess. I don't know the right way to describe it. It's like a friendly Stack Overflow.
You need to work on your diplomacy, JP.
What's not diplomatic about that? I mean, have you ever asked a question? Have you ever asked a question? I mean, last time I asked a question at Stack Overflow, they said, actually, it wasn't Stack Overflow; it was Server Fault or one of the other Stack Overflow related ones. Somebody closed it immediately and then chastised me in the comments about this isn't for workstations, this is for servers. And I'm like, okay. I mean, it doesn't say that anywhere. It doesn't say. I guess it doesn't say workstation fault in the name, but it was super, super unpleasant. And here's the thing. I finally figured out that problem as to what the problem was 2 or 3 years later, and it was some sort of bug in Intel TXT and the BIOS and TPMs and how they all work together, and absolutely impacted servers too. And I think this guy just wanted to be unpleasant. So I don't know. It was awful. It was miserable. And I just don't go out there.
It's a difficult environment for new people to ask questions.
It's a difficult environment for anybody. I'm just saying. I'm not saying there's plenty of the world's software runs on copy and paste from Stack Overflow. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, it can be a relatively unpleasant place to be. But, more importantly, we have something called Q&A where people aren't necessarily that, aren't that unpleasant.
Yep.
And that's where that link will take you, where we have engineers on our team who are out there to help you.
Make sure to use it.
So make sure to use it. Of course, you can always join our Discord and come and talk to us, although we're not sure how much we'll be able to help you, but you can always come and join the Discord. We are happy to help as much as we can. Or just send us an email, 45show@microsoft.com.
Microsoft.com. Yeah, perfect.
All right, let's see how much of authorization code flow we can blow through in 12 minutes. You ready?
Yes.
Let's go. Okay.
Let's do this.
So in the authorization code flow, right? Authorization code, the whole point of the authorization code is that you have a user, and the user is sitting there, and the user is able to do an interactive login, right? That's the key. The user goes and signs in, The user's in front of a browser, a web app, a desktop app that pops open a browser or whatever. But we'll stick to web apps for now. The user goes to sign in. Instead of the tokens themselves being sent back to the browser, right? Oh yeah, sorry, Ultramark. Yeah, there's auth code for service accounts. I don't really know how that would work because you've got the credentials because it's a service account, and so because you've got the credentials, it would be a client credentials flow. Yep. So the user goes to get signed. So the first thing, a user comes to your app. We don't know who they are, so we send them over to the identity system with a bunch of things and say, hey, please sign this user in. I want you to sign them in. I also want you to give me access to their calendar or whatever. The user does whatever. They sign in. They might consent. They might do MFA. They might do all the different things they have to do to get signed in. They send a fax to somebody. I mean, whatever their organizational policies or their policies are that are set up, the user signs in. User does all that. You as the developer don't really have control over all that because it's not necessarily your identity system. Perhaps it's their organizational policy, whatever. User goes and signs in, then they get sent back to the application in the browser, right? So because this is happening in the browser, we don't want to send any tokens in the browser if we don't have to, like an actual ID token or an actual access token. Instead, we send back this code, this one-time use code or few-time use code, but it's only valid for a very short window of time. Usually measured in single-digit minutes, sometimes even in seconds, less than a minute. So that one-time code is what comes back in the browser, and then your back-end web server takes that code and sends it down to the authorization server, to Azure AD, to Auth0, Okta, whoever. Whatever your AS is, your authorization server is, that's this green line, the server-to-server channel. So the server-to-server channel, the app calls the back-end identity system. It says, hey, this is who I am. This is the code that you gave this user. I would like the things that the user said I could have. And so then they get sent back, right? So then the app gets its ID tokens and access tokens that way, and those tokens are only on the server. They never touch the browser, but the user signed in, and we can go call some downstream service or whatever it is that they'd like to do, right? So this is cool, except the app has to authenticate itself somehow. That's the key, right? Is not only has the user authenticated, and we've been provided this code by Azure AD, the app itself needs to say, hey, I am actually the app for whom this code was generated, right? So how do we do that? Well, we end up using some kind of a credential for the application itself, right? And that application, in some cases, is just a secret. It's just a string secret. You generate it in the portal, and so here's your client ID, here's your client secret, and away you go. We'll talk about those in a minute. But at some point, the app server needs to identify itself when it makes that server-to-server API call to say, hey, I've got this code. The application server needs to identify itself to Azure AD or your identity system, say, I am actually who I say I am. Provided that the credential is correct, authorization server sends that back down to the app, and away we go. So now there's a new one called PKCE, Proof Key for Code Exchange. And where this gets interesting is this we can actually use inside the browser or not. We can use this in the browser. We can also use it with a traditional web app. And it's not necessarily a way to generate a secret per se, as much as it is to generate or to verify the fact that the app that requested this user to go and sign in is the same app that is going to receive the tokens for them. So I can't remember the exact name of the attack, but there's an attack where essentially you grab the code and you go redeem the code before the app server can go and do it, right? So it's kind of a man in the middle. With Pixie, we get this extra layer where we essentially hash some data, right? We send that hash in this code challenge. We send the hash in the original request. So when the user first goes to the authorized endpoint and is asked to sign in, we send this code challenge along with it. And it's just a hash of a piece of data. It could be, it's a string or it's whatever, right? When the user gets redirected back, it's still got the one-time use code. But what's the difference here is that there's also what they call the code verifier. And the code verifier gets sent back to the authorization server in that back-end call. So in the server-to-server channel, Then we say, hey, here's the code verifier, which is the unhashed string that we used earlier. If the authorization server can hash that string the same way that was sent in the original request, then it's considered valid, and then it gets sent back. Now you may also still have a client credential there, because they're kind of and like Robertable said, he says he heard that Pixie negates a man-in-the-middle type of attack, where a compromised browser extension can exploit it, and that's absolutely true. It's to prevent somebody from grabbing this one-time use code that gets sent back in number 4 after the user is signed in, is to prevent that code from being reused somewhere else. Because presumably a malicious Chrome extension or malicious browser extension may not necessarily know what that secret is, or what that shared what that shared code verifier or code challenge actually is. So the whole point of it is to make sure that the app that started the request is the app that is redeeming the request once the data comes back. That's really the big driver behind it, right? And as a side effect of also, because we can do this, because we can verify that the app that requested it is the app that's consuming it, it also has the benefit of this works in browser apps. This works in a Blazor app, and a React app, an Angular app, something that's running in the browser, because we can do that verification between the two, right? So on those credentials, let's talk really quickly about client credentials, and then we're going to switch over because our guest has arrived, and I'm excited about that. So, a note on client secrets. Now, in Azure AD, and in most authorization servers out there, you have more than one option of how to authenticate your client. Now, this is not authenticating your user. This is how your app over here on the right is going to authenticate itself back to the AS whenever it needs to do something. This is applicable here. In this case, it's also applicable in what Christos was talking about with client credentials and with client credentials. So when we have a secret, so I've gone to the portal, I've generated a secret, or I've added a secret, right? I've somehow or another gotten this secret. Well, remember that we both know about that. I know about it in my app, and you know about it in your authorization server. So your Azure AD, your Okta, your whoever, they're all going to know what that shared secret is, because they have to, because it's just a password. It is essentially a username and a password. Client credentials is really not dramatically dissimilar from a username and a password, because I have two strings of data. One is sort of secret and one is absolutely secret, and that's what I use. And if you look down here in the bottom, you'll even see when you do that last step of the authorization code, as an example, you send the client ID and the client secret. That's what you're posting in. So there's nothing particularly complex about that. It's just a string, right?
Yep.
So that's cool. It works, and in fact, I'll show you something here in just a minute. It works, and it's kind of okay for development. You would not want to do this in production unless you sort of understood the risks, right? There are some cases where generating certificates and the certificate hygiene required to sort of manage the certificates could potentially put you at bigger risk than just using these string secrets, especially if there's really like no sort of comfort or anything with anybody managing the life cycle of these certificates. So let's talk about certificates. Now, in the case of certificates, I generate a certificate, so I've got a public key and a private key. I only give the public key to Azure AD. I keep the private key for myself. So Azure AD will never see my private key. Never, it doesn't need it. I can store that in something like a key vault. I could use my on-prem certificate authority. I could store it in any number of different places. Windows Search Store, and then have a super lockdown VM. Like, there are all sorts of different ways to store a certificate securely, to store your private key securely on your machine or on your compute that's running, right? Or as Bolt says, when they send you your certificate in an email, and you have to go get it regenerated, because we all know email, the most secure of mediums. But when we're doing certificate credentials, so when we use a certificate to authenticate to Azure AD, what we end up doing is, instead of giving our private key to Azure AD and just using that, we end up signing an assertion. And that assertion is just essentially a JWT with certain values in it. So the same way that we would have, like, that we receive a JWT that has all the different user claims in it, we are instead going to generate a JWT, and then we're going to sign it with our private key. And by signing it with our private key and generating that signature, when we then send in that assertion, that blob of text to Azure AD as our secret, Azure AD, because they have our public key, can then verify, oh, this came from this actual application, right? So it's an alternative way to doing secrets, but it's sort of a one-time use thing. If my secret gets compromised, I got to go update my app. I've got to update anything that's depending on that app.
Yep.
In the sense of CI pipelines or anything like that. I've got to go deal with that sort of that secret exposure on my own. I've got to roll it over on the authorization server side too, and say, "Wow, this secret's been grabbed, so we got to do something about it." When we're using certificates, now it's a matter of, well, how do we secure our private keys and how do we hold our private keys somewhere where they can't be inadvertently leaked, or where only the right things have permission to access them. And in some ways, there's we've been storing certificates and private keys longer in some ways. And so there are lots of, in some ways, pretty low-level things like certificate authorities, like the Windows Search Store, for storing those certificates, or storing them in certain places in the file system in Linux with certain permissions, so that those private keys can't be accessed by things that don't need them. We also have the advantage of being able to do things like roll those keys more frequently. So if you've got automation that rolls your keys every 30 days or something, or only gives you a 90-day validity on that certificate, it makes it much easier through APIs to automate adding those back to your Azure AD as a set of client credentials, to say, hey, I've created a certificate, please add this to the valid list. Let that roll for a couple of days, and then go remove the old ones when the old ones are no longer valid, right? So the reason that we see this, there's more security here, obviously, because we're never exposing any of our sort of key material. We're never exposing our private key. But especially larger organizations tend to have somewhat better hygiene when it comes to certificates, in terms of rolling the certificates, having policies around who can access certificates, why they access them, how they access them, all that sort of stuff. And I think because of that, we see those types of organizations be more successful with this, because it's just a certificate, just like every other certificate that they have to generate for either devices or for web servers or for anything else that's happening. We lost Christos. I don't know what happened to him. Okay, you're back.
I'm back.
So
I'm back.
Certificate hygiene in organizations tends to be a little bit better, and so because of that, it makes it a little bit easier to know when they're going to expire, schedule their renewal, put new ones out there. There's just a whole lot more process involved than a secret that I generated at exactly 12:01 p.m. on Tuesday, February 16th, that I know is going to expire in 1 year. And so at 12:01, I've got to put a note on my calendar or something to go back and rotate it. Okay.
I am transforming to pixel dust, and I think that's probably because we have to come out of MS Learn and get our lovely guest, Thomas, who's patiently waiting on the thing.
Yeah. So we are done on Learn TV. We'll be back next Tuesday with the same thing. For the moment, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to get our guest in here, get them all squared away, and go ahead and get your coffee. Get refilled. We'll be back in just about 5 minutes. and we have a big guest in the middle of the screen. Good morning,
Yes.
Thomas, or good afternoon.
Good afternoon, actually. The corner is cutting onto my head. I don't like this layout.
Oh,
It's like,
well,
no, I
you
need to-
know,
I need to- I'm just messing with you.
it'll be okay. I mean,
Who's muted?
here.
Oh, wait. Bolt.io is saying someone's on mute. Is it Thomas that is on mute?
Oh, I hope not. Let me make sure that it's not. If it is, it was such a rookie move. So
Thank you to our audience for helping us fix these technical issues.
I mean, if I was the one who was on mute, and then that was my like only wisdom I had to say like for the next 1.5 hours, I did that in the first couple of. Yeah, there's not.
oh, okay, you're back
It's good now.
Sorry,
Okay,
sorry.
you're back.
It was operator error. So anyway, we'll try that again. Good morning or good afternoon, Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good morning to you both. Thank you for having me. I guess the other intro, by the way, was way better. I just want to say that, but obviously I was on mute. I just want to make sure.
JP ruined it again.
I know. I don't know. I'd be lucky if they renew me for season 2 at this rate. So. We're gonna need to get a
An
new
addition
host.
at the end of the year.
Yeah, they can't hear you, but they did love your shirt. So there were lots of great comments on the shirt to start. So,
Awesome.
So,
That's good.
so what do you do? What is it you say you do here at Microsoft?
Oh, that's hard.
It is actually very hard because it's like when you explain that role to like from different people, then it's like, but you said you do this and this person does that, and like how can that be the same role, right? But yeah, so I joined Microsoft. I think it's now a little bit over 2 years ago as a cloud advocate, and what we are part of Azure engineering of the developer relations team. My team, or the team I'm in specifically, we are focusing not necessarily on developers, but all like technical audiences, especially also IT pros, and we focus on like operation types work, like management, and especially now, obviously, which we're going to talk today about hybrid. And the things we do is actually, well, if you look at it, like two large focus areas we have. Like there's one. The first one is actually creating content and delivering content to our audience, as for example in this stream today. And the second one is obviously we are very interested in feedback from our customers, especially when it comes to different scenarios where they go over, they use a couple of different Azure services, for example, and then like we want to know what is working, what is not working, and how can we improve, and then bring that back to the different feature teams. So that is basically on a high level what I'm doing.
So the feedback is an interesting one because, of course, we're trying to capture feedback too. Because even though we have similar jobs, we're in a totally different org, and so of course we're focused on getting feedback. What is the best way for people to get you feedback on especially on these like sort of cross Azure experiences of I'm doing this, and these things didn't play well together, or these things played really well together, but I got stuck here. Like, what's the best way for people to get you that feedback?
So, so usually I'm very active on social media. So you can just one thing is like, or on LinkedIn, for example, you can just reach out there to me, send me a message. I have I'm not very good in answering these messages very quickly, but once I get back to you, I will obviously then interact, and we will like find a way to actually probably have a call or even have just a message. And then sometimes I probably just give you a link to, like, for example, if the team or the feature team you're have feedback to, they have sometimes a Git repository, or they have a special way of getting that feedback, then you can enter it directly. It really depends a little bit on how it is, but you can reach out to me again. You find me on Twitter with @ThomasMaurer, or you find me on LinkedIn, or I don't want to do ads on this stream now, but you can also find me on my personal blog, thomasmaurer.ch. There's a contact form which you can use and leverage.
Okay, no, that's totally
I hope
fine.
I hope that doesn't get censored like like a beep or something.
No. So, or so we say. No, man, we love for people to talk about the stuff that they do and their content. That's the whole point, giving you a platform to be heard.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So on the Azure teams, where do you spend most of your time focusing? Like what kind of workloads or what kind of scenarios are you most interested in?
So, like when you look at what I'm coming from, I came basically from the data center and virtualization parts earlier in the days. I did a lot of infrastructure deployments when I was like working as a Microsoft partner or as a Microsoft customer. And so for me, it was a natural thing to go in these hybrid environments, right? So for me, like I worked a lot with, for example, Azure Stack and the different Azure Stack offerings we currently have. And now one of our larger topics when we talk about hybrid is obviously Azure Arc. So that is where I spend most of my time on. But however, you will see, I mean, that's why I'm here, right, to talk about Azure Arc. You will see Azure Arc has a lot of touch points with a lot of different things. And so, yeah, that's going to be interesting. But that is where I spend most of my time on.
Okay, cool. So for people who aren't familiar, I mean, what is Azure Arc?
So, I mean, what we saw before I go into like a little bit of Azure Arc, what we saw a lot is that hybrid cloud is a big, obviously, topic for a lot of customers out there, right? I think it was Jason Sanders who said during the Ignite 2019 keynote, when we still had in-person events, he basically, while he was doing his keynote and was obviously talking about Azure Arc, because that is when we announced it, he said that like for a lot of our customers, hybrid is going to be an end state and not just an in-between state until everything is moved to the cloud, right? So we believe strongly that there is a big need for hybrid cloud offerings. Because there are multiple reasons why customers probably want to not just move everything to the cloud. In many cases, they can't. For example, they have technical reasons where they don't have enough bandwidth, they have bad connectivity, they have too much latency, for example, to the next Azure region. Even though we have a ton of different regions all over the world, sometimes it's just like an app can't handle that latency because the connectivity is not good enough, or again, you don't have any connectivity. And there are obviously other things like data sovereignty reasons where customers just are, for example, not allowed to store data outside of a country, for example. They need to keep it inside, and we don't have, for example, offer Azure region in every country. So there are different reasons, obviously, and there's much more to that. And so we are thinking about, okay, how can we make it easier for customers to actually, like, how can we help these customers, right? I mean, especially if they can't use Azure. And so Azure Arc is our maybe one of our latest solutions, which help in our hybrid portfolio, help our customers to do that. And I think that is also, by the way, very important that I mentioned this. We don't have just a single product which does hybrid, right? I mean, if you look at it, I get a lot of questions when we announced Azure Arc. Is then like customers were like, does that mean replace Azure Stack? Will there be still Azure Stack? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? Because there are different use cases for it. Now, to come back to your original question, Azure Arc basically is two things. It gives you a single control plane. It uses Azure as a control plane for all your resources. Stuff which is obviously in Azure, like Azure Virtual Machines and stuff like that. You already use today. You use Azure Resource Manager to manage all of that. But customer told us like, hey, this is great. I manage all my Azure resources at scale. But what about the resources which are outside of Azure? Like, what are my servers I run in my local data centers? What about the servers I run even at other cloud providers? I want to have that single control plane. And again, I mentioned now servers, but obviously that's true also for other things like Kubernetes clusters, for example, so as well, right? And we'll see that in just a bit. That is one thing. So they want that single control plane. So Azure Arc is actually that bridge between our Azure Resource Manager and the resources which are outside of Azure. And it makes resources which are outside of Azure not just look like an Azure resource, but they actually create an Azure resource for that. So it's actually an object. That is one thing. The other thing is, and I have a very nice quote from one of the PMs in the Azure Arc space, the Azure Arc enabled data services. we had a ton of feedback, obviously, that people love Azure SQL. Like they love managed instance, they love that it's a service, that they love that they can scale it, they get all that security and stuff. But again, for some reasons, they cannot use it running in Azure in some cases, right? So when the customer cannot use like our services running in Azure, we bring these Azure services in there to their data center or wherever they want to have it, right? And that's the other part of Azure Arc. So there are actually two things: the control plane, and then also like bringing services into the customer's data center.
That second part's really neat. I haven't really heard much. I mean, we've done a little bit of Azure Arc here, mostly from the developer side of getting a managed identity and being able to use one locally and stuff. But you know, I went to the portal and I would create one, and they're like, "Oh, look at all these other buttons we could press, like update management, and that sort of thing, like that I've never really used." So, like when we say hybrid, right? So I guess we'll start on the control side, right? Like when we say control plane, like what does that mean? Like if I've got I'm guessing, like say I've got a VM that's on-prem, and it's sitting in my data center or under my desk, as it were. What can I do with that VM that I maybe would either struggle to do otherwise, or you know, like do I get anything new? Like what kind of things can I do now that this thing is an Azure Arc server, right?
Yep. So I think the easiest way, I'm going to show you that in the portal itself and show you a little bit how that looks like. And then, well, there are many different management services we have, right? Now we can quickly have a look at this if you want to.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's switch over. Okay. Let's take a look at your
Bring
screen.
on the demos.
Yeah. Awesome. All right.
Awesome. So I'm now. I hope you both have seen the Azure portal, right? Just kidding.
A little bit familiar. Yeah.
Just a little bit.
So we are here in the Azure portal, and you can see on the all resources page here, and you can see here for those like on the stream, everything in Azure, as I mentioned, is kind of like an object, right, and a resource. And so it has a name, and then it is a type. So we have our virtual machines, we have public IP addresses, even network interfaces are actually resources in Azure, and they are basically part of an Azure resource group. And then they have like basically deployed and or running in a location, and they're part of an Azure subscription. So for everyone who uses Azure, nothing new here, but that is great, right? And we can then manage that really at scale. I have now a couple of I probably have like 100 resources in that demo subscription here I'm showing you, and so it makes it very easy to manage. And all that magic is actually done by the Azure Resource Manager. Now, as a customer, I would say, hey, this is so great. How can I leverage Azure to actually like also manage other stuff? And that is what I'm quickly going to show you to make it easier. I'm going to show it here, and let's go and say I only want to see two types. I want to see, let's say, should be able to type. Let's go first and add. You can see here I have resource types called Server Azure Arc. So I already joined a couple of servers, so I'll select that, and then let's do. Sorry about that. Let's do also virtual machines. So now I selected basically servers, Azure virtual machines, Linux and Windows, which are running in Azure, as well as my Arc machines. Those are all servers I already joined to the Azure control plane using Azure Arc, and they show up here now side by side. So you can see here, for example, this Hyper-V server here. Let me zoom in here. You can see here that this actually has a type, and it's also joined to a resource group. It's also joined or connected to a region, and it's also part of an Azure subscription. So it looks like an Azure resource. I can then even use tags. So for example, if I filter here, let's say I use a tag here. I have a cost center tag, and now let's select just cost center 1003, and I hope that works for all the resources. You can see here now, I can see all my servers within that specific cost center. It doesn't matter if this server is running on-prem or at another cloud provider, and this one is running in Azure. So I have like the single control plane to actually look at things, which I think is pretty cool. But of course, we're not stopping there, right? So to show you, by the way, this is not just what I want to also make clear. This is not just showing like items in the portal, right? It's much more. That's why I mentioned so strongly like subscriptions and resource groups. So it is actually a object in the Azure Resource Manager. So if I go here, for example, to Azure Resource Graph Explorer, and if it loads, I can then open a query which I predefined and say, okay, I want, for example, run a query to list all my Azure Arc machines. And you can see here, I can run that query, and what will happen, obviously, I will get all the list of my Arc machines. So I could run that query, obviously, also using the Azure CLI. I could connect them using the APIs, or I can use PowerShell to do that, right? But you get the point. It's actually a Azure resource and not just like something we show in the portal, right? But now you say, okay, Thomas, this is great, but probably not necessarily the main thing, right? Not necessarily. I mean, it's nice to see all this stuff, right? But you probably want to see a little bit more, or you want to actually do something. So I'm sure you're both familiar.
I think that's the big thing, right? Is so I can query for them, I can tag them just like other resources, but like why do we tag things, right? So you can find a group of them and then do things to them, right? So now I'm excited because now I think you're going to show us doing something to them.
Exactly. So again, we mean like with tagging and organizing. To be honest, I mean this is like we are treating it now as it's a small thing, right? But if you look at many of our customers, having an overview about like all their systems running wherever they are, but sometimes it's tough, right? I mean, I was in consulting before, and if I told customers I need a list of all your servers, I said, okay, I'll come back in like 2 weeks. I will need to see if we can get an inventory, right? So, for the people who aren't really familiar with Azure Policy, Azure Policy allows us to basically configure our Azure environment and like make sure that we can actually govern, for example, our environment, because you don't want anyone in your company deploy our largest M-series virtual machines with a couple of hundred cores and terabytes of memory, and they drain your credit card in like 3 seconds. You probably want to keep control, right? There's another feature called, for example, the Azure Policy Guest Configuration part. And this allows you to actually audit and configure basically the operating system side. Doesn't matter, again, if it's Linux or Windows, but you can do that for your Azure VMs. Now, what I want to show you here is because now your servers running outside of Azure become Azure resources, you can also leverage that for non-Azure servers. So if I go, for example, here to assignments, what I can do is I can do assign initiative. That's basically just a collection of policies. And then I select here different policies. We have some built-in ones. So you have here a list, for example. Some of them are very technical. Some of them are focused on different standards here. You have, for example, UK official, UK NHS, Swift, PCI. You also have ISO certification. And again, this helps like for your whole environment. But what I want to show you is actually there's a one which does audit of my machines if they have insecure password settings, right? So I can select that, and then I can go out and deploy this, and then in the past, it would now go out and audit all my Azure VMs. Like in that specific subscription, I can obviously select a different scope just to be clear here. I can also select just a resource group or directly on top of a management group. But this then takes a while to audit everything. So like in a good cooking show, I already prepared something here. And if I go to my compliance view here, you can first see that I didn't do a very good job. And secondly, you can see here my policy, which I already deployed. So this is, again, the policy I just showed you. And I'm obviously not compliant. And you can see here why I'm not compliant. So these are all the different rules which I'm not compliant with. And then what is more interesting is what resources are actually not compliant. So if I click on the no compliant resources, you can see here that I have now my Azure VMs, if I zoom in here, you can see here, for example, Azure OS Server. That's, for example, an Azure VM. You can see that with the resource type, Microsoft.compute/virtual machines. But on the top, you can see here my Ubuntu VM, or my Ubuntu server, I shall say, because it could also be a physical machine, which is actually a hybrid compute machine connected by Azure Arc. And it says, hey, that server, that Ubuntu machine you run here in the room next door is also not compliant with that specific Azure guest configuration policy, right?
Nice.
So isn't that
what
already...
Well, that's already useful, right? I mean, being able to see, especially Azure policy. I mean, we haven't spent a whole lot of time on policy, but I mean, especially for auditing and that sort of thing, that's a huge step compared to compared to what we see on prem a whole lot.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, again, this is now the cool part. Is now, I mean, this capability is there. There's a policy part. There's a guest configuration policy part. That is there for like quite a while in Azure, but now with that we can easily extend it to like all the resources outside of Azure.
Yeah. So what about remediation then?
That's a good part. That is something currently remediation is working for. We have that for Azure VMs, and we're currently working to bring that also to your Azure Arc machines as well.
Okay, very cool. So in the future, I'll be able to say, enforce a policy or something, and have that actually push all the way down.
Exactly.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And so, I mean, this was just a little bit, right? We have obviously more to share, and
sure.
What I want to show you is now you ask me like, what else can I do, right? So what I can do here, if I want to learn more about Azure Arc, or I want to actually onboard systems, and we will onboard the system in just a bit to Azure Arc, then I just go in the Azure portal. I go to Azure, I find, like, for example, in the search, find Azure Arc, and then I get to the Azure Arc Center. And this is actually the control view I have where I can actually go out and bring all these Azure Arc stuff to life, right? I spoke now, if you look at the menu here left, I spoke about servers here. But you can see here I also have Kubernetes clusters, SQL servers, I have Azure Stack HCI, which we can talk a little bit about later.
Nice.
Which everything is connected to Azure, right? And I can then take advantage of different management tools.
So that means I can run my SQL Server on-prem, and then that can be managed by Azure Arc, right?
Exactly.
Sweet.
So this is actually a good point. So, for example, this is not like Azure Arc enabled data services where we actually bring Azure SQL in. That's another part which I also can show you. But this is actually, so if you have SQL Server, as you just said, in your data center, you can connect them up to Azure. And then what you can take advantage of are a couple of management features. And when it loads, I can quickly show you that here. And the first thing you can see now, it looks like an Azure resource, right? It's something like an Azure resource would look like. You can set tags here. It's part of a subscription. And then you get some additional information here. For example, that this is now a SQL Server 2019. And what we can do today is, one of the main benefits is to connect your SQL Server, for example, is you get some security information. So you can take advantage of Azure Security Center and the recommendations we have there. So we can actually see, hey, what is going on here with that SQL Server, and you get all these security notes, right?
I love it.
And is that similar to like what? Is that similar? That's similar to what I would see if I was running SQL in a VM in Azure, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's exactly. So this is now we are in the view for that specific server. But if I would go now to the security center, I could see all my VMs or my servers running. Again, doesn't matter if they run in Azure or outside of Azure. I could see all of them, and I could see like all the recommendations I have, or everything which is not compliant or unsecure, and all of that. I could see that in a single place. But now, since I'm the admin, for example, for SQL Server 1, I just want to. I care about my server, right? And so I'm actually just looking at my server here. And the same thing. And again, these are, as you can see here, these are currently in preview. So we have the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters, which we talk in a bit about, is in preview. We have SQL servers, which is in preview, and we have also the Azure Arc enabled data services, to bring Azure SQL managed instances into your data center, also in preview. What is in GA is the server part. So that's why I'm quickly going to show you that, because that has a lot of functionality already. You can see here all the different servers which are already connected to Azure. And you can see here I have, for example, a data center tag, which tells us where is that machine running. And you can see here a couple of them running actually in a very good high performance data center at my home. Probably not so, but it's like it's good in winter. It like I don't need so much heating for all the power usage. So let's have a look at the server. And again, this is something we can do now. Again, this looks even more like an Azure service, right? Now on the left side, you can see here I have, for example, activity log. I have role-based access control, which we will talk also in a bit, because that is one is very important to us. And then obviously you can set tags and so on.
Thomas, we have a question from Ultramark. He's asking, earlier chat indicated that you could not launch apps when Apple servers were down. Can similar issues occur if a VM is managed by Arc? Can people still manage their on-prem VMs if Arc is down?
Yes, that's a very good question, and the answer is yes. So what I usually, when I do like slides show, is that you can use Azure Arc to manage your servers, but that doesn't mean we want to build that dependency with Azure, right? We don't want that, like again, when your internet goes down, or your camera is frozen, for example, then you don't want that your server isn't running anymore. I will try to fix the camera in just a bit. But we don't want to create that dependency. So you can still use all your local management tools. The server will still run. The application on that server will still run. If it's a Kubernetes cluster, that Kubernetes cluster will still keep running. We don't want to create a dependency in that sense, right? You just can obviously then in that moment not use the management tools you have. And let me see if I can.
So on that topic, while you're looking, I was so I seem to remember, and it's been a while, but I know like in the Intune world, for example, where we're talking about managing workstations and stuff. There's this idea of sort of hybrid management where Intune works with SCCM, and I can manage workstations, manage desktops, etc. But I can kind of do it from both on-prem and from cloud side. Now, at the same time, I haven't looked at that in a long time, so it's possible you can't even do that anymore. But good, your motion's back. So when it comes to management, like my understanding of Arc is it's primarily sort of agent-based, and that agent receives commands and sends data back. But I'm guessing that would never really preclude me from separate management software. Like if I've already got something that is very specific to my org or my company or my whatever, using Arc doesn't preclude me from still using existing tools, or even, and obviously things like RDPing or SSHing to a VM that's sitting in my data center. Arc's availability is independent of that.
Correct. I couldn't have said it better. That's exactly true. It's not, again, we don't want to create that dependency. We don't want to remove all your tools you're using, because probably they are doing a lot of good stuff, right? They're probably there. However, again, you probably want to don't use like we have a lot of customers ending up now, they use some of the management tools for their Azure environment. They use some management tools they have in their on-prem environment, and then they have some management tools which they use at other cloud providers, for example. Now with Azure Arc, we try to have that control plane, so we can reduce the number of management tools you need, and you get actually that single control plane. But again, that doesn't mean that you cannot use your existing management tools at all. So if, for example, you're very good with Windows Admin Center, then go ahead and use that. It's even a good combination, right? So now let's get deeper into this. And as you can see here, I cannot stress this enough. Probably everyone on the stream gets bored by me saying that again, but because it is a real Azure resource, we can do some really cool stuff here. Again, you have security. Again, gives you security recommendations. Now, not just for SQL Server, but also for the operating system itself. And then we have something called extensions. And if you're familiar with Azure VMs, you have the same thing there. So you have VM extensions which you can leverage. So what does that mean? For those who haven't familiar with extensions, if I deploy an extension, these can be a lot of different tools and stuff like that. But for example, here for the Azure Arc VMs, we can use that. We have, for example, a custom script extensions, which allow us to run a custom script. We have a PowerShell desired state configuration extension, which allows us to configure DSC on my server. And then we can also go out and install the log analytics agent, which then will provide us with some additional monitoring capabilities as well. So that is something where now you can see the similarity now between Arc and actually like Azure VMs, right? And then what I did, I obviously onboarded a lot of stuff already onto that VM. Or again, when I say VM, actually this could be also a physical machine, right? I have to be careful what I say here, not that people think it's just an Azure VM. I can onboard log analytics, and now you're probably all familiar. This allows us to collect all like logs from a machine, pump them up into an Azure Log Analytics workspace, and then run queries against that. Now a lot of you probably say, Thomas, well, this is not something new you're showing me. This is already existing. I can just go out and install log analytics agents, and that is correct. However, the problem we had with log analytics and workspace was actually when it comes to role-based access control, right? I could set permissions in Azure on the log analytics workspace and say, hey, if I have all my 200 servers connected to that log analytics workspace, and I need to give Thomas, the admin of this server 1 here, access to his own logs, that he would see all the logs of all the different servers. And I don't want that, right? So you can see here that we have actually a scope set. So this is now the scope. I can only run queries against that specific server. So I can then get, for example, like performance data here if I run a perf query. And then I get that data here in just a second. It's fast enough. You can see. Oh, why is it not showing results? Oh, here we go. Sometimes I'm just very. Here we go. I'm not a very patient person when it comes to waiting. But you can see here, I can run obviously queries against the logs of that specific server. And again, this is now filtered. So for example, if you have SharePoint admins, or you have, like for example, let's say you have Active Directory admins, which are only supposed to work on domain, with managed domain controllers, but they probably should not have access to the SQL servers. Even though probably if they're the Active Directory domain like admins, they probably would have access anyway. But you get the point, right? So you can actually limit the scope here and say, hey, Thomas, for example, he has only access to that specific server and he can only manage that server. What is also very cool is that with these logs, we obviously also get Azure monitoring capabilities.
Oh,
so the first thing I want to show you is performance. And if my performance would be better, it would load a little bit faster, but...
Well, so on that topic, now you've got me thinking. I mean, so if these end up in monitor, that means all of the, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but rules and the like, those all get processed too, right? From data that's on-prem.
Correct. Absolutely correct. So here, as you can see, we get all the CPU like utilization, memory. You can also see that this server is not doing much usually, right? And then you can see here like disk I/O, disk bandwidth, latency, and all the neat stuff you want to see. But what is really cool is when it comes then to maps. Like I'm not sure if everyone who's not familiar with Azure Monitor, again, this is an Azure Monitor feature, is like with a dependency agent. You can now see here the dependencies of that specific server. So you can see here that 10 clients are connecting to that specific server, and then you can see that this server is connecting to other servers using different ports. I quickly zoom in here a little bit. So for example, he connects to that port 138, and it says 3 servers. To be honest, I feel like it should be called endpoints, but now we have a look at it, and you can see here it connects to these different servers, which are now local servers.
Oh,
but if I go for example, let's go to like port 443, and you will see here that this now also has like public internet-facing connections, right? So I see here where he is actually connecting to, and you can see even the Azure Arc agent. If I zoom in here a little bit, that's like basically the endpoint of the Azure Arc agent, where the agent of Azure Arc connects to. And so you have all these cool features, and that obviously that feature, as again, you're very familiar probably in using that in Azure, but also you can use it now for outside of Azure.
That is awesome. I love it. Like I haven't used the monitoring side I don't do a whole lot of VMs anymore. Luckily, I get to just write software and let it run. So this is awesome. This reminds me of the App Insights map that we used to have in like app service and functions, and I'm sure it's. I mean, I guess everything's workstation based now, but or workspace based. Like that's awesome. I think, especially the fact that it's for on-prem machines, like. Obviously, in Azure, we can see we get a whole lot of visibility for tools like this. But being able to see this on machines running on-prem or other, right? Like that's pretty.
Yep.
That's pretty awesome. I love this.
Yep. And there's more. Believe me or not, there is more.
Please do tell.
So what we also have here is, for example, change tracking. We have some awesome features, and they again exist in Azure for a while, and they also could use it for on-prem VMs, but they never really got we were very bad in talking about these features, and it was also obviously like when you look at role-based access control, we also had some problems there, because back then when we used it back in the days before Azure Arc, it was not really because it was not really an Azure resource. It was hard to do role-based access on these things. So now I have, for example, change tracking, and I can see here I, for example, installed here a update from Defender.
Is that configuration drift, almost like DSC, desired state configuration tracking?
Correct.
Is that what you're doing? Ooh.
Yep. So you can actually see here if something is actually what is happening on the system, right? I cannot this is now not reverting it back or telling me, okay, this is not. For that, I would, for example, use then policy, the guest configuration policy part. But it already sees hey, what is going on? Like, what did happen? When did that change happen? And I can actually go through these logs and see what is going on. Obviously, not just here we have changes, but then also we have with that also an inventory. So we can see here what software is installed on that specific machine. So you can see here, get a repository list of all these, mostly updates. But for example, I can also look for a specific software which is installed on that machine. So if I look for Edge, you can see here on that server, someone installed the Edge browser. It's highly likely that this was me.
Can you see who installed it? Can you see get to that level of granularity?
In the changes you could see, however, you could see okay, which user did obviously the install. I'm not even sure if I can see it in here, but let's click on it. Because here I just basically see what is installed in the inventory part, but on the changes I could obviously go and see what happens.
And just to clarify, does this functionality support workstations as well? So if I add my workstation as an Azure Arc node, will that show up as well?
That's a very good question. So I know that it's working. However, Azure Arc is really designed for servers. So officially we support server operating systems, Linux and Windows. And we can quickly have a look later on which those are. But there's a lot, obviously, and we add more and more systems. However, I don't think we have the client on the list, because, again, this would be more like a Intune probably management thing, right, where you probably want to run your workstation managed by Intune. But again, I have people who actually managed to install. I think one of you told me that you actually tried it, right?
Yeah, I use it. I use it on my machine for. I was using it purely to get a managed identity endpoint, which works and is fantastic. I'm actually enabling the logging and stuff now, because now I'm my curiosity has peaked. And
awesome.
I'm curious to see, although it is my workstation, so Lord only knows what kind of logs are going to get shipped up there. But yeah, it absolutely installs on Windows 10. I cannot get it to install on WSL 2 because there's no systemd and there's no PID1. So that is one problem, and I tried a few things, and I couldn't really get it working the way I expected. So, but I've definitely put it on some Ubuntu VMs that are running in Hyper-V on my local box. But yeah, it's actually running on my local box currently right now. So yeah, it totally works on a workstation. Whether or not you're supposed to, that's never stopped anybody before, right?
Exactly. And then one thing we already mentioned here, obviously update management. Which is great. I mean, this is already like something, again, a lot of people did not know that we have this. You can see here, actually, I did a very good job because I just recently updated that specific server. So you can see I'm just missing some Defender signature updates or definition updates here. However, it would obviously tell me if I miss any important security update, and it would show me a big red button here. But let's say I want to install these updates here. I can just go and schedule a deployment. And this would create a deployment job. And so this is now a single server. I'm just saying this is now for this specific server. It obviously recognized that that this is a Windows machine because we already onboarded it. And then I can choose some like different reboot options. So reboot if required sounds actually like a good idea. And then I can schedule this. So I could update now. This would actually then kick off the update job in like 5 to 10 minutes. However, since I'm in a live stream with you here, I probably don't want to do that. So I could actually schedule that for later. And I could even go out and be so bold and create a recurring task for that. Because I probably don't want to manage updates for the rest of my life. I can just create a recurring task there and say, hey, every Tuesday, 10 p.m., for example, you go out and install the updates, right? So you can do that. And then you can select which updates you want to install. Again, this is now showing the specific Windows update classifications. On the Linux side, you would have the Linux ones. And then you can include and exclude updates here as well. And then you can even run a pre and a post script if you need to, and you can actually create that job. Now,
you mean you're not going to run the updates live on the stream and see what happens?
Well, I want to use that machine for some other stuff, but I mean,
just messing with you.
So how does this
happen, right?
How does this relate to like a WSUS, right? I mean, like, is this and obviously this isn't Arc specific, right? I mean, what's sort of the how do those two live together, or do they not?
That's a fantastic question. So you're speaking about the Windows Update Service, right? Windows Server Update Service. I think that was like the goal of the name. So they work absolutely together. So what Azure Arc does, or basically the Azure Update Management Service does, it basically orchestrates the update process. However, the update source is obviously what you have defined. So if you have defined WSUS for it, then it will take updates from there. If you have Microsoft Update, then it will take updates from there. The source is like independent from the Azure Update Management in that sense. Update Management basically just is the orchestrator, if you will, to do that. Now, obviously a lot of people now, next question, find that so impressive and they like that feature so much, by the way, I do too, that they say, hey, well, I now have like 20 machines. I don't want to configure that for 20 machines. So if you click on here, manage multiple machines, it actually takes you to that Azure Management Service, which is a part of an automation account. And it takes you directly there where it's configured. And now you can see here, I can see all my machines which are joined to that update management solution. And you can see here I have non-Azure VMs as well as Azure VMs side by side. And you can see here some of them have missing updates, some of them do not. And then I could also go here, or I could also like find out which updates are these and so on. And you can also see that, I think you can see that, I'm not sure. Yeah, you can see here that some of them are obviously Linux VMs and a couple of them are Windows VMs. And then you could do the same thing here. You could actually schedule an update deployment with the only difference being more or less you could do a group of servers. Like you could say, hey, I want to have all these servers or servers with a specific tag. You could actually go out and schedule that update and deploy that. So that is basically parts of it. And we have obviously more. But I want to show you now a little bit how that actually works, and obviously we want to also talk a little bit about identity too, I guess, because you're that stream.
No pressure. No pressure.
You manage, like, you mentioned managed identity before, so we're going to show you that the Arc system will also have a managed identity, and as you said, you're using that already, and that is actually pretty cool because now if you want to have a server which is outside of Azure accessing Azure resources, you can actually use that managed identity. But I promised you also that I quickly also want to talk about Kubernetes before we go there. As you know, Kubernetes is a hot topic everywhere. So here we have, instead of just managing a server, here I can manage a Kubernetes cluster. And as you can see here, again, I don't want to go too big into that, but you can see I get also logs and insights. So I get monitoring for Kubernetes clusters, as I would do if I would have an AKS cluster, for example, in Azure, right? And what we can also use policies. That's also a big part, like the policy part for servers. Obviously, I can use that to make sure that also my Kubernetes clusters are configured in the right way. And then now we get some additional functionality. And imagine now you have like 20 Kubernetes clusters with an application deployed, and you want to update that application. So what we have there is a mechanism we call GitOps. And that allows us, for example, to configure app deployments on that specific cluster. So because I'm like I mentioned that before, it's like a good cooking show. I already prepared one here. So I deployed an application here. And what I did is actually the application is stored in a Git repo in GitHub. And I said, okay, hey, let's on the Kubernetes cluster, let's get that application and check every 3 seconds if there is a change, which is probably in production a little bit aggressive, but for demos, I think that's a good thing, right? So I deployed that, and here is my application. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it like? I expected applause now, but okay.
Sorry. Oh, hang on. No, we can do that.
Wrong, sir.
Oh, wait, no, sorry, that's the wrong one. No, we don't want that one. Oh, wait, no. No, it is. That is your app, and it's. I mean, you know.
I love it.
I even took credit. I mean, mine was not close as beautiful, but we worked with like someone to make it pretty. So, and now I see. Okay, there's something wrong, right? I mean, it says now, "Hello, this is my app." So I don't want that. It should say something else. So what I'm going to do, and again, like people watching, don't try this at home. I'm going to be now this bad admin guy who just goes into the main repository and doesn't change without anything, right? Like this is now I promise this is an emergency fix, right? So here is the actual message. So if I zoom in here, oops, and I want to change that, so I'm going to exactly do that. And again, don't try this at home because it's probably not the right thing to do. So let's call this, hey, Azure Community. Right, and then I'm still gonna like to fill out here the changes I'm doing, right? So I'm just gonna do that, and then I'm gonna do the committed again. Gonna do that.
No
change.
PRs, no nothing. Straight to main.
Exactly. That is.
That's how real people do production code. don't please.
Unfortunately, it is the case sometimes, right?
You know, my first job straight out of university, I was working for a very small company in the UK, but it was a small company that had almost like 90% of all the bottles and labels generated in the world. So scarily enough, our development process was developing straight to production. And lo and behold, me, a young developer, totally naive and silly, I was running a query against a live database. I deleted 15,000 invoice records from the production system, and you know everything that could go wrong on that job went wrong. We didn't have backups. We didn't have proper deployment process. Like my deployment process was grabbing a USB stick with the executable and running around the factory floor, sticking the USB to every single device I could find. So yeah, please do not do anything in production. Do not be a Christos.
I mean, why would if you develop directly in production, why would you even have backups? I mean, come on, like then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's like a place I worked years ago. They did SharePoint development, so like, I mean, like we're already setting the bar at a certain level, but
Yeah, SharePoint.
it was, oh, well, it's 2 p.m. Let's go copy a bunch of DLLs out to the prod servers, and let's do it with a script instead, And yeah, I mean that was what SharePoint development was back in 2008, whatever it was back then. So. Okay, all right. So hello, this is my app, and we've made your change, right?
Yes.
And also, we talked now long enough that multiple times 3 seconds are passed. So I'm sure if I hit the refresh button now, it changed the text, right?
We wanted to give you enough time.
That was really helpful. That was really helpful. No, but you see, you get the point. It changed the message. And again, this is obviously not so impressive if you just change a message. It's obviously more impressive if you actually do like real deployment of an app. And this could be basically anything, right? And it's even less, it's also not that impressive if you do it just with one cluster. But think about now, if I would have configured that for like 200 Kubernetes clusters, I would have configured that app configuration here, that GitOps configuration. I could like update that app in just like 3 seconds in that case, right? I can just go out and deploy that. Obviously, do it in a pipeline, make it in a dev environment, everything. But still, I can really quickly manage and configure app deployments to my Kubernetes clusters running outside of Azure using that. But by the way, that also works obviously with Kubernetes clusters running at other cloud providers. I have to always say that. There's no special version of Kubernetes needed. So if you run OpenShift in your on-prem environment, for example, you can use that too. That is usually questions we get around that. Okay.
No, okay, so on one more note, then one more question. Does that also include like managed clusters elsewhere? Like if I'm running EKS or something in AWS, can I still manage that here too?
Yes, you can.
Oh, nice. Well, because I mean, OpenShift, does anybody actually use OpenShift? I mean, I was thinking like of things that people, that people use. So okay, that's cool. No, that's awesome. That's awesome.
The idea is really that we can actually have it like across all the different deployments you have, right? I mean, obviously we support certain service like versions of it and so on, and you can find that obviously in the documentation. But it shouldn't really matter. We don't want to make it like all Microsoft Play, for example. You probably have heard of AKS on Azure Stack HCI, where we actually bring down the Azure Kubernetes service to an Azure Stack, and so then you have like your AKS running in your own data center, and obviously that can also be used together with Azure Arc, and so you can actually then see that cluster popping up here. So then if you want, you can have a full Microsoft stack, but you don't need to have that. So if you want to just like use it as a control plane but you run Kubernetes on top of, for example, your VMware environment, that also completely works, right?
So does this run as like agents that are running on the nodes? Or is this running like in a pod? Is it running in a container? Is it like, where is it? If I deploy this to if I wanted to say I wanted to bring a Kubernetes cluster under management, just one that's running like in a data center or something somewhere. What am I actually doing? Like, am I running? Is it like a YAML based deployment, or am I running scripts on the nodes? Like, how do I get there?
So what you can do here is, I hope it's loading. You can register your cluster here, and hopefully this gives you already the answers to it. So you can register a new cluster. It also tells you, obviously this is just a prerequisite, so it tells you which versions it supports, which ports you need, and those are usually outgoing URLs. And this is also something important I want to mention is when we talk to like people about like when an agent, the agent needs internet access. Actually, it's not necessarily internet access. It just needs access to certain Azure URLs and endpoints, right? So that's a very different than you can still lock it down and so on. And then here you have like how to set up like your machine, how you're actually going to do that and deploy that. And then you can enter here the details of your cluster. And I just need to now quickly pretend I'm doing something here.
Yeah, I've learned the Azure Arc setup wizard is really just pre-fill a script, and which is cool in some ways because it means I can do it 1,000 times to get it exactly the way I want it. And
so you can then actually go out and use some already add some tags, and then you get here the script which you then can run, and then
cool.
it connects your cluster against it. That's, for example, that you can download this specific script here and do that. And this is for a Kubernetes cluster. But what we're going to do now, and again, you can also switch here, you can switch that to Azure PowerShell if you want to. But what I actually want to do with you, to believe me that this works, I'm going to take a little bit better, well, not better, but easier approach here for me. I'm going to do that with a server. We have two ways of adding a server. We can create an interactive script, or we can, if you do that for hundreds of servers, you probably don't want to log in on each of the servers and put in your Azure credentials. So you can use a service principal, which only has permissions to onboard systems to Azure Arc, right, to your subscription. That's the thing here. But to show you that, I want to generate an interactive script and see how that works. Again, here for this one, we only have outbound for free to specific Azure endpoints. You obviously need local administrator rights on that server to install the agent, and you need to have an existing Azure resource group. So I'm going to select that, and I usually let me quickly.
There are a lot of resource groups there.
Yep, I wanted to do that in order, but I can do it here. So let me do that one. I can then say what is the closest Azure region. Again, this is not necessarily important. I could also go and use one. I'm based in Europe. I could also select one in Southeast Asia or anywhere else. However, you obviously want to have like the closest one. So for me, that's going to be, in my case, West Europe. I'm going to onboard a Windows server. Again, if you do a Windows server, it will create a PowerShell script for you. If it's a Linux server, it will create a shell script for you. I can then.
What about macOS? Boo.
Do they have a server operating system still? I know they
used
had.
to, didn't they? They used to have a Mac server, right? Is that still around?
Yeah. I did actually, like back in the days, I had a Mac Mini which did run one of these, but so far we only support, I think, Linux and Windows in that sense. I could already configure a couple of custom tags. I can also do that later. I can also use Azure Policy if I use that, like to tag resources. And then here I get the script. Now the script does everything for me. It goes out, it downloads the agent, it then installs that agent, which is in the Windows world, it's a MSI file, not mistaken with the managed identity one.
Because we're so good at overloading acronyms, right?
Exactly. I usually don't mention that, but here I think in this stream it makes sense, right?
Yes. Yes, it does.
And then here, it basically then the last command, it actually registers my server. So what I'm going to do, I want to quickly show that. Like, let's copy that here. I hope it's copied it. So let me believe here, you can see here all my servers, and now I'm going to onboard a different server and have a local server created here, Tom's VM2, which I'm going to onboard. So what I'm going to do here is, let's do enter PS session VM name.
Is there an option to actually onboard a new VM directly into Azure Arc as you deploy the VM? Do we have any extensions in the marketplace for Azure to do that automatically?
Well, if it's a Azure VM, you basically don't need to do anything because it's already getting that, right? So that is okay. But if you do a VM outside of Azure, you could actually go and put that script with a service principal in your automation, and then actually it will go out and you can even like do, for example, pre-install the agent, and then just run this registration command after the server while the server is deploying or after it's deployed.
Right.
So here I'm now on that specific server. I didn't, unfortunately, that's how good I'm prepared. Sometimes I didn't change the name here. I want to be like the pro and say, hey, I'm on Tom's VM2, but you can see that luckily here. So let me run that script, which goes now and hopefully works in a remote session. It's also something I haven't tried, but we're all friends here.
We're all friends. It's a safe space. Don't worry about it. Failure is welcome and encouraged.
So the advantage of doing it in a remote session, like people would ask, why did you not just open here the console? I can also do that. The advantage here, I need to, as I mentioned, I need to log in, right? And it will take me to device login. And if I do it here, I don't have to copy all the stuff. I can just click on a link, and that's why I'm trying to do it here as well. While this is installing, let's have a look at the machine I have already done that.
Okay.
So here is a machine. Here's actually the WAC 01, which we already used. So if I go here, I have a process now running. And that's actually the process of the Azure. Let me see. Maybe I'll make it a little bit larger, right, for the friends on the stream. So you can see here, this is now the process running. And then I have a command, Azure connected. So it's Azure connected machine agent. So you can see here, I get the information to that, and I need to talk to the team here. Mine shows now in German, even though the system language is in English.
Is that a bug?
It actually takes some stuff, but you understand that here you have the different commands, and so if I do, for example, a version, I can see actually the agent version I've installed. This is the current one, and then I can, for example, run, like that's what I'm running now on the other machine is actually the connect one. And then what I also have is... Is it a good thing that
you can connect and disconnect on whim? Like, you know, I wonder if somebody could maliciously run that command to disconnect a device from Azure Arc.
Obviously, well, you need to, yeah, that is obviously like a thing you could do. The thing is, obviously, you need to have certain rights, like you need to have like admin rights on the machine to actually do a disconnect and a connect, right?
Right.
So when you have admin rights, then the machine, I would say, is lost anyway, to be fair. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this is a good point. Like then it falls out. However, when it's disconnected, it will then show in the portal as well. It won't show anymore, right? And it will show that this order is not connected anymore to that. Or you can also see if, for example, the agent just didn't respond anymore for a while. You will also see that in the portal, and at one point it will say expired. So then, what I can now, yep.
Well, so it sounds like what we should do is those little toys where like you flip a switch and the cat paw comes up and it flips the switch back off, and then that's all it does, right? Those like simple machines. So we do this. We have a DSC extension, a custom script extension that just runs disconnect, so that as soon as it onboards, it just unonboards itself again. But to Robertable's point in the chat, when that disconnect happens, I assume because this is all going into Azure Monitor, that you would have some sort of a state change event that happens that could fire off, whatever kind of automation you want, alerts, texts, whatever.
Correct. And as soon as it falls obviously out of like management, obviously also like, for example, if you go back to the identity part, obviously your managed identities and also lost and not working anymore, right? So in that case, you would just not see it. And we could obviously, that's actually a good point. I think whoever came up with that, gave me an idea for a blog post. So I could, like, for example, it will show in the logs that a machine is disconnected, and I could actually go and with Azure Monitor create an alert and say, hey, as soon as a machine is disconnected, I want to have an alert in my inbox or in my Teams channel or wherever I put my alerts, and then actually do that. So that's actually a good idea. I just got an idea for that. Thank you very much, whoever I stole the idea from.
Robert Tables, little Bobby Tables.
So what I can do is there's also a show command. On what it does, it now gives me all the information. And what is very interesting, obviously you can see here, it's joined to that resource group, and I get all these local informations. I can see here that everything is running. But more interestingly, I can see here which tenant I'm connected to. And I can also see what ID I have, right? This is now the ID of that specific, it says VM, but actually it should say machine, right? Again, it makes the same mistake as I always do. It could also be a physical machine. And that is now the ID I can use basically when I then run my managed identity and I want to identify myself to that. No worries with that. So that is what I run on that machine. So now let me switch back here. I hope I'm fast enough. Okay, you can see here now the script set basically. Do you want to join that machine? Here is device login. So what I can just do, let me see. Opens the right browser here for me. Well, it does. So it installed the agent, well, download the agent, installed the agent, and now I'm registering that server. And if it's nice to me, yeah, it is not nice to me, so.
Well, kind of like what we talked about earlier with when Chris was talking about device code, like right now that agent is sitting there polling Azure AD saying, hey, has anybody done this? Has anybody done this? Has anybody done this yet? You know, has the user signed in? Has the user signed in? And it's polling that endpoint, waiting to see if if that authentication request is complete for that specific device code.
So now, please recognize me. Okay, here we go. It looks, I'm sure it looks silly on the stream if like, why is Thomas looking like that? But just using my
no one is saying that, and if they do, I will defend you.
Oh, that's true.
Quickly, somebody grab their binoculars. See, Thomas was listening. Yeah, grab the binoculars.
So now you can see here, I'm actually joined that machine now. So let me quickly clean this up here. And now what happened is here, if I give it a couple of seconds, and now I actually need you to actually give me a couple of seconds to actually pretend we are not waiting for this. But if I do a refresh, and again, it takes usually a couple of seconds actually.
We can wait a few seconds if we need to.
This is awesome. This is I need this also here. Like, so you can see here now, as again, this happens if you don't prepare everything nicely. Your server here now, the one I just showed you before, is now onboarded to Azure Arc, and it shows up now in the portal. And now actually it like reports the agent reports to that back to the Azure infrastructure. So that is cool. And then obviously I get, if I click on it, you can see that this machine is now exactly under management using Azure Arc. Again, and then I can do some like things I just showed you. For example, enable log analytics, enable monitoring, enable security center, and so on. And speaking of that, I usually get questions about, did anyone ask about pricing, by the way? If not, that's like very highly unusual because people usually ask about pricing.
I mean, for what we were using it for, the agent itself doesn't cost anything, yep. Right?
Correct.
Yeah. So Mark says, I assume that this is free. Is that the right assumption?
That is a very good assumption here. So we have the basic management, like just onboarding a server, using like tagging, using the Azure Resource Graph, using role-based access control, the managed identity part, and update management, all that. That's actually all free.
All free.
If you then add like other services, like the monitoring part or security center and policy and all that, then there's some cost coming with that, obviously, because it's also same thing for Azure VMs as well, right? Except for policy. And then for Kubernetes right now and data services, because they're in preview, there's no additional cost right now. So if you want to try these out, then you can do that too. Okay, so let me quickly go back to the managed identity. Actually, we're here. I was actually here to talk about the managed identity piece, right? So I have a machine here, and let me quickly switch to this portal because I don't like to go a lot on the go big on our identity tenant in the Microsoft space. So I have my own tenant here.
What? I love the robot. Wait, what is that?
That's my
cloud robot.
You don't know, Tom. You don't know my logo. That's like
I do not know your logo.
That's disappointing. But okay, I will make sure that I speak to my marketing manager that they should like do some better work on that and make sure that people actually know what it is. So yeah, as you can see, when I have some spare time, I actually customize the Azure portal a little bit and the dashboard. But what I actually show you now is this is now my own tenant. And these Azure Arc servers, which are on board, they get now a managed identity. I don't have to turn it on like for an Azure VM. So every server here, which I onboarded, and again, this is now another tenant, so you will only see one server here, which is on board, Tom's VM. This one has now automatically a managed identity. So if we connect now to Tom's VM, I'm going to do that remotely here.
While you're doing that, people are asking, can we get a sticker with Tommy the robot?
There are stickers, by the way, yes.
Oh.
Well, you need to reach out to me, and then we will see. You will reach out. There's no. Well, you can't get the stickers in the shop, so you need to reach out to me, and then I'll probably send you some wherever
Special.
you are.
Yes, limited edition.
Yep.
Okay.
So now I'm on this machine. I onboarded again. Now this time.
You have to sign up for your newsletter. Somebody says.
Oh, awesome! Well, a new subscriber. That's that.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Roberto Balls is hiking people by subscribing them to Cat Facts. Don't do that, Roberto Balls, please.
Yeah, no, that's not a good thing. So you can see this now. This is a machine I onboarded. Again, this has now a host name. You can also do, like, for example, again, if you do the AC connected machine agent, let's do show. You can see that this one is connected, again, to an environment. And what I want to do now is, let's say I want to get a storage account. I'm quickly going to show you, obviously, you do much fancier stuff with identities, right? My demo is a little bit simpler. I just want to now, from that machine, manage, for example, my storage accounts. So if I would run Azure PowerShell, obviously it says, okay, you're basically not logged in, so you need to first log in. Now, I don't want to log in with my user account. I want to use the actual the identity here. Now, as you're familiar with, you can, on Azure VMs, for example, you can use dash, I think it's dash identity. Oh,
I think it's just dash I or dash identity. Oh no, that's right.
Yeah.
PowerShell. Sorry.
Yeah, on the CLI, it's exactly works like with dash identity or dash I, absolutely, yeah. And so with the PowerShell one, that's why I also trapped here. It's just dash identity. However, now I was working obviously with that to prepare the demos and stuff. We have currently something in the Azure SDK which prohibits me to use that specific part, right? So if I would run that, I would run now into an error. That is not because of the managed identity or something. There's just something I don't recall, something in the SDK which PowerShell is currently built on, or also the Azure CLI is built on, which does not leverage the Azure Arc part. However, it's actually the same. So what we have here, I have a script here which will generate me a token from the managed identity. So I'm just going to run that. And that is now my token. I can now use that to basically log in, and I will run that command here. So let me quickly copy that.
So I've got to ask, while you're doing that, what is this history thing you've got going on for PowerShell? Because I love it. Yep,
this is actually super cool. This uses the new PS readline module or feature. They come with PowerShell 7.1 is, I think, their standard. And if you want to use it with Windows PowerShell, you can just reinstall the PS readline version, I think 2.1 or 2.2. 2.2 is currently in beta. And then there is a new feature which actually gives you history. So if I write a command here, you can see here now I have history commands. However, I will show you that. Let me quickly switch while we're waiting for this. We're not waiting for it.
I don't get that one. I'm on 7.1.x. I still don't get that.
You need to enable it. So there are. I will show you that in a second.
Yes.
So
let's dive right from identity stuff and show some cool things.
But here, sorry, I'm very passionate about PowerShell. That's why I love that question. So here I'm running PowerShell 7.1, and this has some even more features. This does not only use history, as you can see. It also uses a module I installed called the AC Predictor module, which predicts what you want to do. So if I do, for example, get AC key vault, then it gives me already like predictions on what you probably want to do.
That's similar functionality what the Azure CLI does for almost Find, isn't it? When
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, correct. So this is awesome. By the way, I turned it on for a couple of days. I just learned about it, and I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna turn this off ever again.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Nice. Yeah, send us the links if we can get this for our users.
So now I'm obviously logged in using that token I got from the managed identity endpoint, and then I just do get storage account and get it, and I obviously can be logged in. I really wish the identity, and this will work. They're working on it. It will come in soon, like in a couple of releases. I don't know when exactly, in which release of Azure PowerShell or the Azure CLI it will come, but it will come that it actually can just use the identity part to use that. However, if you build apps and you run against the APIs anyway, then it's exactly the same way as you would do it with an Azure VM, right? It feels exactly the same way. And if I now go to the Azure portal here, am I frozen again? That will not be nice.
Your video is, but here's the thing. Every time your video freezes, it freezes you in like the most photogenic way possible. So both the last time it froze and this time, it's not like if it was me, I'd have one eyeball that's higher than the other and half closed and look awful. But
I feel it's
every time you've frozen, it's been like a perfect snapshot. So
trust me, that's usually not the case. This is really the first time. So
see, this is the difference, Christos. This is why you and I aren't in proper DevRel. We're in identity.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
we could never pull this off.
We could never pull it off. So
trust me.
Blurry.
I'm blessed that it happened there, and like usually it happens on, as you said, at the worst possible moment. I will just take a moment and fix it. But before I do that, I quickly want to show you that this has actually now worked. So, for example, also here I can do let's say I do a role assignment here. I think it's an easy way to show that this is actually a managed identity. So if I go, for example, I think Tom's VM is the name. You can see here it shows up, and I can actually use that as I would use it with an Azure VM as well. Nice. So I have that now available. Now think about this: is how crazy this is. I can now use the managed identity for on-prem servers. Again, physical, virtual, Windows, Linux, and so on. And even if they run at another cloud provider. So I can actually take that app and whenever I don't even need to modify it, I can just use that endpoint against it on that specific machine.
So from a developer perspective, this is fantastic because you don't have to have any secrets or any connection strings to anything that can be managed or accessed or secured via managed identity. So if it's a SQL server or an API or Azure Storage, your app running somewhere else, as long as the device is Azure Arc joined, then you can benefit from it. It's insane.
Yep. So what I want to show you, actually, that is also something I haven't unfortunately set it up yet. But in addition to that, we also have an extension for Azure Key Vault, which didn't show up right now in the portal, right? So you need to have you need to actually use PowerShell or the CLI to deploy it. Okay. But what you can do is actually you can use that Key Vault extension. Now think about if you need certificates on your machine, right? In the past, you probably used the group policies or something to roll that out to your different machines. Yep. Now you can just create a certificate in your Key Vault. Let me show you. I think the graphic here explains it really well. Put your certificate in a Key Vault, and then with that extension, it automatically gets deployed to your Azure Arc enabled service in a secure way, obviously.
Oh, snap. So that means that, let's say I have a service that needs to run authentication against Azure AD in order to access resources. I can use Azure Key Vault to push the certificate into that VM, and then I can, instead of using client secrets, I can use a certificate to authenticate that service account and do the necessary. Man, that's an awesome scenario, JP. I think we should show it at some point. Like doing it end to end.
Well, I think that
looks dope.
I think things like being able to roll your SSL, your TLS certificates, right? Like being able to get that cert out of Key Vault via the managed identity, and then use that to, or even like mutual mutual TLS certificate, whatever, right? Like whatever things you've got in there. I think that's awesome. Or if you need to access things under a different context, right? Like if you can't use the manager's identity to access SQL, you must use one that your IT admins have said you must use this specific account. Then at least you can use the manager's identity to bootstrap up to the key vault to get your key from there.
Yep, exactly. So this again, and I hope this shows like a little bit. Like again, I showed a ton of different stuff, obviously, but the main point I think is important to understand that this now it gives us some Azure features to stuff which is outside of Azure, and I think that is a pretty cool thing if you then can combine that, and again shows the whole overall picture what we're trying to achieve and give customers the right tools wherever their applications are running, right?
Yes.
Is this using so is this using this key vault extension? What BSD guy is asking, or does this update certs, or is it just pulling, or is it just for deploying certs to it?
No, you can see here, I can actually go out and actually have a pull interval, which happens here. So you can configure that and say, for example, every hour you want to pull if there are new certificates. You can also obviously have do multiples and list these, and then you get all these basically in. And you can see here, this is a script I'm running here. It obviously uses the local endpoint as we had, and this is again the same thing as I showed it now with the PowerShell module, but again, this would exactly how it works. You can exactly use it as it would work in an Azure VM in that sense.
And this is just custom script extension, right? I mean, is it anything more complex than that? Does it rely on other functionality, or is it just I could just take this script and deploy it with custom script extension and be done?
No, so this script here is actually run, like you can see here, this is a PowerShell commandlet, which is part of the Azure Arc module or the Azure Connected Machine module.
Yeah.
So you will need to run that. For example, you can run that on your machine. Doesn't necessarily need to be run on the machine you're managing. You can run that, for example, in your Cloud Shell or whatever. And this will then go out, as you can see here, and deploy the extension over Azure to that specific server. So this is not run on the local machine itself. Well, you could, but it actually runs against Azure. And here's just the configuration which we push down. So you could. So this is actually the settings we then take into this Azure Key Vault extension, and that's what we then push down to the Azure Arc enabled server.
Wow!
Directly from Azure. So you don't even need to log into the server to actually push that down in that sense.
So you connect to Azure PowerShell, write subscription, and you're done. Damn.
So we got a question from GA Crow. How frequently does the agent need to connect back to Azure? How frequently is that agent connecting back?
Keep alive, right?
Sorry?
It's the keep alive. How frequently?
To be fair, I don't know exactly when the timeout is. It will then show, let me quickly show that in the portal itself. I don't know exactly where the timeout is set to, but it will then show as, the first timeout will then show the server here. And I'm sure we can find that in the documentation. It's a good question, actually. I'm a little bit getting a little bit blush here because I don't know the answer to. I haven't checked that yet because it's a very good question. No one asked it before.
You don't have to know everything, right? We can look at the docs.
Exactly, but yeah. So at one point here, you can see the status is connected. After, I don't know again what the timeout is. It will show disconnected. And then after a couple, I think it's at least a couple of days, it will then show expire. So at one point, if your server, for example, doesn't come back, it will expire after a couple of days and it will not be under management anymore. And you need to re-onboard it, which obviously then also it lets the managed identity expire to be sure. That no one finds an old server somewhere, turns it on and suddenly has some rights to it, right? That would be not a good thing.
That's an interesting one, yeah.
But again, here you can see it here. So usually I did now a great job setting up my demo environment. Usually there's always some servers down and then it shows disconnected. However, here you can see that everything is online right now. Unfortunately,
One other clarification to the question is like air gapped environments. Like if they turned on and had internet connectivity for so many, like for a period of time throughout the day, I guess it would really be sort of a sync of, hey, this is what's happened and this is what I need to process, right? And I guess it's just a matter of once we know what that timeout looks like, that'll probably explain the feasibility of that kind of scenario.
So for the server side, I think we do not really support air-gapped scenarios yet in that sense. I need to double check, but I don't think we do because we don't have any changes into that. We do that for example, the other part for the services we deploy. For example, I think for Azure Arc enabled data services, we can deploy them in a disconnected environment. So we can actually do things like that. However, here we obviously want the system to pull. Again, the timeout is set. I don't know how long you could, if you could modify it and make it okay, let's wait for 3 days or something like that. But you obviously would not get all these informations. The monitoring part would not work. The log, all these benefits you get would not necessarily work in the way you actually want it, right? So, but this is something definitely I wanna figure out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, this whole thing has been super cool. I got one question for you. You mentioned the data thing, right? That like bringing Azure SQL on-prem kind of thing, right? What do you have anything that you can tell us about that? I'm just really curious. I haven't heard much about this, so I'm really curious to hear more about it.
So this is actually super interesting. And I had a very good talk. And again, I don't want to do advertising here, but I just recorded a session with Travis Wright, who is actually one of the people working on this, about Azure enabled data services, and he explains exactly. He goes really deep into how we actually manage that, and so. I will quickly scroll down. This is our Teams blog, and you can see I have multiple sessions here we enabled. And at one point, you will find Travis and me. I don't know, where is he? Where is he? Where is the session? Can someone spot it? Oh, here we go. So that is actually what we're going to do. And so what it happens, how it works. Again, as I mentioned, people want to have Azure SQL. They want to have that service, they want to have it deployed as a service, they want to have deployed it, but they want to keep it in their location, or you could even run it at another cloud provider, as I always say, right? What it actually needs, the requirement for it is a Kubernetes cluster. So that is actually what you're going to do. You're going to onboard a controller to deploy that on that Kubernetes cluster. And from that controller, you can then go out and deploy SQL managed instances, as well as, for example, Postgres as well. So that's what you can do. And we have a whole session. I think it's I cannot remember, it's an hour and 20 minutes or something like that, where we talk about this. And you can see here what we actually can do. So this is definitely an interesting session to watch, where he goes through all of that, because I think we're running out of time a little bit, and I want to take that. I don't have any. Also, I would show you if I would have a demo ready. I would obviously also show you that, but I don't. So
no, it's all good. That's super cool. I was curious, sort of how it worked, and that tells me a lot right there.
Yep. So. Again, so the main thing to know what the requirements are. Again, it's deployed on top of a Kubernetes cluster. It's a container-based solution, so the only thing, the requirement you have is a Kubernetes cluster. Again, this doesn't need to be any Microsoft version of Kubernetes or anything. This can be, again, I bring up OpenShift or something running in AWS or Google or anywhere, and then you can go out and deploy that, and then you can treat it as it's actually a SQL managed instance.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm going to go try this out. So.
I will check if the video here gets 1 or 2 more views. So I'm
Awesome. Well, hey, this has been fantastic. Thanks for showing, kind of giving us a lap around it. Now I've got monitoring turned on. I mean, so at least you can put that. You can put that and say, well, at least one person enabled monitoring. And log analytics after watching this. So I'm actually looking at all the machines that my machine is connecting to, and now I'm a little concerned. So yeah.
Yeah, so by the way, just to speak about your concerns, for the logging part, obviously you can manage that. So if you go to, I'm sure you're aware of that, but like first for people also watching Azure Log, where do I have it? Well, let's not log analytics workspaces. You can actually then turn on what logs you actually want to bring in for that specific machine. So you can say, hey, I only want to see these logs. But obviously, if you enable monitoring, for example, you will obviously need the performance logs and it will automatically enable this. But if we go in here, and I'm not sure, because I did just a video on it, you can actually go to, I think it's under agent configuration anymore, or agent management. We'll see. Doesn't matter, you can actually configure it here in the log analytics workspace. You can turn on which logs should get sent to Azure and make sure that these get sent, or if you, I think it's under agent management. Then you can turn it by on machine basis what you want to send up.
No, that's cool. Well, and it's my workspace too, so I don't mind so much as long as it's not going to somebody else's workspace. So no, this is super cool. Like, in fact, I think it even helps me understand what's going on because I'm connecting to a turn server for one of you to get your video, which might explain why we've been having so much trouble with Christos and Snow. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah.
Well, it was awesome. Thank you so much for taking all the time to show us. This was killer. I love it.
Well, thank you very much again for having me and giving me the opportunity to show this to even more people. Really appreciate it. I was really happy when I got asked. I was like, woo! Yes, I want to be on this. So no, thank you very much again. It was a pleasure. It was a lot of fun also to talk to you both.
Sure.
So that was really fun.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Awesome. We'll make the video available on YouTube as always, so people can go and check it offline. We'll ping you a link if you want to promote that. And for people that want to reach out to us, you have the links at the top. You can email us. You can use Twitter if you want to ask questions. Always happy to help.
Yeah, make sure to follow Thomas on Twitter and catch up with all of the videos and everything else that are spread out and distributed across the Microsoft content ecosystem. So here's one of 17 different sites where you can watch this video. But be sure, follow him on Twitter. Get your sticker. Get your sticker by subscribing to Cat Facts. Thomas's Cat Facts. In the interim, hey, we're gonna be back on Friday. Be hanging out and writing some code on Friday. In the interim, send us your email. Send us your notes.
We have a Thursday show, right? Do you want to have a Thursday show this week?
I don't know. You're off this week, so that means you scheduled a Thursday show on your week off. So
I am
sounds
amazing.
like I have a Thursday show.
Two user groups. We got Thursday. We got Friday. It's insane. But it's fine.
So anyway, we'll be back later this week. But ping us on Twitter if you have any problems. Join the Discord. Discord, we've got some fun conversation. In fact, we have a few questions that we need to answer that are out there on Discord, which we'll try to cover later this week. And until then. Stay salty and stay snowy, Christos.
Stay safe. Oh well, the snow is almost melted, so stay safe. I would say.
Well, the sun's out here, so I'm finally excited about that. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us today, everybody. We'll see you on the other side. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.